So if we could grab our seats, we can begin the festivities.
I don't have the motion.
Hi, Michelle.
What's that?
Hello? Just testing. Testing, 1, 2, 3.
I'm making friends with the appropriations guys. Well, I don't know them at all, so. Works really well, yeah. Do you have to hold it? So when the light is on?
Before we begin the meeting, I have a couple of comments I'd like to make. Regarding last evening, I received several emails from individuals who said they were offended by some words that I used. Those of you that know me know that's the furthest thing from my intentions. If I said anything that made anyone at this town meeting uncomfortable, I am offering my apologies at this time. With that being said, let's get back to business. Article 34.
Article 34. I move the town vote to amend Part 7 of the Northborough Town Code, the Northborough zoning bylaw, Section 705-020, 705-030, and 709-030, by adding the text shown as underlined as set forth in the warrant.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded.
Okay. Hi, I'm Amy Paretsky. I'm on the Northborough Planning Board. I don't think I mentioned it last night, but here I am. And this article has to do with craft breweries. This article defines for the different types of craft breweries: nano brewery, microbrewery, and a brewery, distillery, winery, and adds it to the hospitality and food services section of the zoning bylaw. It also adds these definitions into the parking section. A microbrewery is a brewery that produces small amounts of malt beverages, including beer and hard ciders. These are often independently owned. Many breweries also serve a selection of food items. For someone who's never been, I would compare it to a coffee shop where people gather with friends and socialize. They play games, there are trivia nights, and some hold yoga classes in the morning. This is a use that residents have requested, and many surrounding towns have already added to their bylaws. Hudson, Marlborough, and Westboro currently have breweries in town, and Shrewsbury added these similar bylaws in 2020. Thank you. The Planning Board voted to recommend approval of this article. Anyone have any questions?
Before we have the questions,
Sorry.
may I ask for the information from the Municipal Code and Bylaw Committee?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mitch Cohen, 12 West Mead Street. I chair the Municipal Code and Bylaw Committee. We unanimously recommend this article. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, are there any questions, discussion on Article 34? Hearing none, this is what you're voting on. I move the town vote to amend Part 7 of the Northborough Town Code, the Northborough zoning bylaws, Section 7-05-020, and Section 7-05-030, and Section 7-09-030, by adding the text shown as underlined and set forth in the warrant. This requires a 2/3 vote, so if the tellers would be on their toes. All those in favor, please raise your cards. And those opposed? I declare that Article 34 has passed by the necessary 2/3 vote. Article 35.
Mr. Moderator, I move the town vote to amend Part 7 of the Northborough Town Code, the Northborough zoning bylaw, Section 703-080, enforcement, by deleting the text shown in strike-through and adding the text shown as underlined, as set forth in the warrant.
Second.
Okay. The town of Northboro currently has a section in the bylaws called enforcement. This specifies the zoning enforcement policy in town. There are 3 sections in this bylaw. The general section, which states the zoning enforcement officer is charged with enforcement of the zoning bylaws. The second one, Part B, is the enforcement request, and C is a penalty for violation. The planning board recommends updating B, enforcement request, by including a time limit to send out the enforcement request. There is currently no time limit specified. One reason for doing this is to eliminate being accused or perceived of not treating people equally. For example, if there's an enforcement request to someone sent on one day, and then the next person receives their request 50 weeks later, it can be perceived as unfair regardless of the consequences. The planning board also recommends updating C, penalty for violation, to include the enforcement of special permit conditions. This was discussed with the board and the zoning enforcement officer and town council. This is already implied but wasn't in writing. The planning board also recommends Section D, a penalty of revoking the permit if a violation continues and the order of the zoning enforcement officer is not obeyed. Town council stated that these updates are belts and suspenders. The zoning enforcement has a policy, but some of the verbiage was missing from the bylaw. The bylaw will clarify the current enforcement policy and ensure that everyone is aware of the policy, whether you're a resident, business, board member, or staff. The planning board voted to recommend approval of this article.
Thank you. May I hear from the Municipal Code and Bylaw Committee, please, on Article 35?
I'm pleased to report the Municipal Code and Bylaw Committee unanimously recommends this article. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions or discussion on Article 35?
Hi, my name is Michelle Gillespie. I reside at 117 Howard Street, and I'm a member of the Planning Board. I actually voted no on this article, and there's a reason why. It's our zoning enforcement officer was not in favor of this article. There's a listing in this article that says the zoning enforcement officer may or shall. And so the zoning enforcement officer said that you'll be a more business-friendly community if you go out to your businesses and you actually help educate them and use the may vote. And so we went back and forth, and I voted no because I think it's very restrictive, it's very punitive on the businesses, and I'd much rather have a more friendly approach to our businesses by having the word may in there versus shall, which forces the zoning enforcement officer to do something immediately within 14 days. And we actually went back and forth on several scenarios where we could think that it really wouldn't work out, but the board overwhelmingly decided to keep the word shall in versus may. So I think, in my opinion, if you want to continue to be a business-friendly community, to help educate your business owners about the zoning, which can be confusing for all of us. I've been on the planning board for 18 years. I know zoning can be confusing. It's much better if you go to your businesses with a friendlier approach, and that's the may versus the shall, which is a very restrictive, far-reaching, over-regulating approach on their business community. So I'd ask you to consider sending a message back to the planning board to consider changing this language from shall to may, which is what the zoning enforcement officer asked the planning board to do. Thank you.
Over here, please.
Carrie Martinek, 16 Hemlock Drive. I'm also a member of the planning board. The other 4 members of the board were in support of this because it's really already what we have in place. It simply solidified it and protected residents and everybody else by making sure everyone was on the same level playing field. It's 14 days regardless, so there's no misunderstandings of how long can pass until there's some sort of ruling from the zoning enforcement officer. It's nothing more than that. Thank you.
Over here, please.
Hi, Karina Hansen from 6 Buck Hill Road in Northboro. From a resident who is surrounded by businesses and has been in front of several of the boards, kind of fighting a little bit of what's been going on. I appreciate this. First, I do appreciate Bob Federico. I know his job is extremely tough. I really do appreciate all he does. Maybe this is a time for that position to maybe open up to another maybe 0.5, because I experience in my lovely neighborhood, which we pay a lot of taxes to, that the businesses don't necessarily follow what they're supposed to do. And I know we want to be business friendly, and I really appreciate that. But time and time again, I just go, well, I'm not going to call. My husband's not going to want to call Bob again because they're doing exactly what we just fought in front of the board, to not cut down the trees and use the chainsaw, and that's what they're doing at 7 o'clock in the morning, even though they're not supposed to be using the chainsaw. So I'm just kind of using these examples because I know it's tough. I do see both sides, but I'm tired of fighting for businesses to follow the law. And I shouldn't have to, as a resident, feel badly that I'm going to call Bob to say, okay, they're not following this, we just fought this, I don't have time to research 40 hours like my husband does when he goes through. It's exhausting. It's exhausting as a resident. I want the businesses to follow the law. We can't guarantee it. I talk from personal experience. A lot of my friends in this town talk from personal experience, so I appreciate that there are people thinking about us, the residents, in this case.
Any further comments? Yes, right there.
Hi, William Pierce, 367 Whitney Street. One thing we have to remember here is we're talking about enforcement, right? If I get pulled over by a police officer because I'm speeding, they should give me a ticket, right? It should be a shall. This should not be a may. Again, we're talking enforcement. We're not talking, that the ability to be able to change. Thank you.
Yes, please, to a microphone.
Hey.
Hi, my name is Bob Federico. In case you don't know, I'm the zoning enforcement officer in Northboro. I'd like to clarify one thing that was already mentioned, that, everybody seems to think enforcement is for the businesses. I'm here to tell you that the vast majority of zoning complaints that I get are resident to resident. And the most frequent ones, more often than not, wind up in court. Okay? So it's not just an attack on the businesses. Okay? Going on from there, every zoning complaint is different. Some are handled by a simple phone call. Some are handled with a couple of meetings. Some are handled with, enforcement letters. And then if that doesn't work, we can issue fines. And we found that fines, more often than not, we skip right over them, they go straight to court, okay? Here's the thing, education is key. The zoning codes are complex. Nobody understands them, including me sometimes, okay? That's why we have town council to help us out, okay? So everyone is unique. The goal is to give the person who is offending, if there is an offense, the opportunity to correct what's going on. And sometimes that takes more time than others. Like I said, sometimes it takes a phone call, sometimes it happens over a weekend, sometimes it happens over months. If you would just like me to come down and lay the hammer down, that's your call. But here's the thing. If you're looking to punish people, keep it up. This 14-day requirement, in my opinion, and you can make your own opinion as you want, is too restrictive. Thank you.
Can I just follow up
Over
on
here.
one thing?
Bob,
Wait, am I the moderator?
Bob, my battery's been charged tonight. Can you come back up, please?
Is there a point of order? Raise your hand when you have a point of order. I can't see who's saying it. You need to come to a microphone.
Throughout last night and today, I've noticed areas where people have just been allowed to speak without the moderator recognizing them. I would just like to call a point of order on that, as I see the same trend, and also whether or not staff can come and speak at the podium without being called upon if they're not a Northborough resident.
To answer that, it is at my discretion as to whether people are recognized or not, and I have made it my greatest duty to recognize people as fairly as I possibly can. As far as staff coming to speak on behalf of the discussion and the debate that's taking place, certainly that can happen at the request of the moderator. I can't hear you speaking.
Respectfully, I did not hear you request it,
What are we talking about?
to have staff come to the podium to speak.
I don't realize, I don't recall, I don't know what you're talking about.
My point of order is that can staff come to the podium and speak if not recognized by the moderator?
He was recognized by the moderator. I
I-
told him to come to the microphone.
Okay, thank you. I did not hear you request
I'll speak
that.
more clearly next time. Hey, if we don't quiet down, we're not going to get done. May I continue? Thank you.
Can I introduce myself now?
You may.
Thank you. John Foraker, 99 Pleasant Street. I'd like to ask Mr. Federico to come back up to the microphone, please.
Well, I will ask, do you have any...
I'm sorry. Could you ask Mr. Federico to come to the
May
microphone?
I ask, what is your intention?
To ask a couple of questions of the inspector's position.
Mr. Federico, are you comfortable doing that? I'm sorry, he does not care to do that.
Okay. My question is, I would like to know how much strain this article is going to put on the building inspector's office, because they are overloaded. I know. I just did some renovations at my house, and we had to be on a schedule. We had to be there. The building contractor had to be there. I've done a lot of work through the building department, along with Mr. Federico, and I just wanted to know, is this going to put a strain on the office, which is going to create more time between permits being issued when they're all put into place correctly?
I don't have an answer to that. I just wanted to make sure I had a chance to speak also before it was closed.
Certainly. Apparently, there's not an answer to that.
Isn't that wonderful? Thank you.
The gentleman over here, please.
Thank you. Scott Stockland, 12 Patrick Drive. I think this makes all the sense in the world. As a member of a neighborhood that's been victimized and living next to a serial violator, this is what we pay our taxes for. And quite frankly, I don't see how someone getting a written notice is punishment. We talk about education. This is one way that you can get educated. You get the letter in the mail, you see what you're doing, and you stop doing it. So 14 hours would be better, but if 14 days is what we're going to get, then 14 days is what we're going to get. Thank you.
Ms. Kortensky, did you have some comments?
I did. I wanted to speak to some of the items that were said. I want to make an effort to say that this in no way, shape, or form was anything to do with any staff position. It wasn't meant to be harmful to any staff position. This came up because we asked what the policy was. You know, there were people who called, they said, what's the policy? And we have the policy in front of it, but there were certain pieces missing. So we added the pieces in, we added the words in, but it was in no way to say someone is not doing their job or they're not doing it properly. It was just to get the wording in the bylaw. So there's a number that goes with it, and it's the letter. It says the building inspector shall have 14 days to give notice in writing to the owner of the property and shall order the violation shall cease immediately and may order corrective action. This is to get the letter out to say there's a violation, and if he finds a violation, if there's no violation found, he sends a letter out saying no violation was found, and that was already in the bylaws before. But there was no statement saying if a violation is found, there's a time limit on sending a letter out. It's just sending the letter out. Other towns said immediately, and when we first discussed this on November 16th, I have the minutes. When I first brought it up, I mentioned how other towns say you immediately write a letter for it to cease. And we had a nice discussion with the board. And Mr. Federico said, you know, immediate is really requires time. Can it be changed to 7 days? And we talked about it over the next few months, and it went to 14 days. And if someone ever said 30 days, we would have agreed on 30 days. We were just trying to place a time limit on it because it can't be just never ending. The other towns have a time limit, and our town didn't have a time limit. That was all we were trying to do. We're not trying to point out that I'm sure Mr. Federico does a good job. And the reason why I couldn't answer how this will affect his job is because I don't know how many enforcement actions he gets a day or he doesn't get a day. I don't hear complaints. This was just to add some wording into the bylaws so we could have the policy in writing so everybody knows, whether you're a resident, whether you're a business person, whether you're a board member, you know what the policy is. This isn't meant to be anything other than that. So I hope people aren't taking it that way. And I hope Mr. Federico doesn't feel that way. This is not an assault on him in any shape, way, or form.
Any other questions or discussion? Hearing none, this is what we're voting on for Article 35. I move the town vote to amend Part 7 of the Northborough Town Code, the Northborough zoning bylaw, Section 7-03-080, enforcement, by deleting the text shown in strike-through and adding the text shown as underlined, as set forth in the warrant.
Second.
Actually, there's no second, but that's okay. I'm glad you feel strongly about it. This is a two-thirds vote. All those in favor, please raise your cards. And those opposed? I declare that Article 35 passes by the required two-thirds vote. Article 36.
There we go. Hi, everyone. My name's Carrie Martinek. I'm a member of the Planning Board. Tonight I'll be covering Article 36. I move the town vote to amend Part 7 of the Northborough Town Code, the Northborough zoning bylaw, Section 7-03-030 and 7-05-010A, by deleting the text shown in strike-through and adding the text shown as underlined, as set forth in the warrant.
Second.
The Planning Board recommended passing the Article 36.
Is there any presentation?
There is. I didn't know. Do we need to ask the Municipal Bylaw Committee or no?
I do after your presentation.
Sure, no problem.
Thank you.
Okay, so as we get started here, I wanted to take a minute to talk about use variances in general. This proposed bylaw actually removes the ability of the ZBA to issue a use variance, and many sitting in this audience may not know exactly what that means. So I want to take just a quick minute to talk about that. So as you may know, this is our zoning bylaw book. It's basically our town zoning rules. And the people that create the rules are the voters, everybody sitting here tonight. This is our rule book. What a use variance is an exception to the rule, and the group that we give the authority to issue that exception to the rule is the Zoning Board of Appeals. So first I want to say that there are members of the ZBA that I like and respect very much. So it's not a personal thing. It could be, even if I was on the board myself, this is a philosophy in zoning where the intent behind this bylaw is really to put zoning back into the hands of voters. So with that, what I wanted to do is talk a little bit about what this bylaw means. When I first joined the planning board, I went to a few different trainings. I really tried to absorb as much information as possible. And one resource that we use, that both land use boards go to, and other boards as well, is called Cptc. It's the Citizen Planner Training Collaborative, and it's a collaboration of the Department of Housing and Community Development, along with the Mass Association of Regional Planning Agencies. And in their materials, I was really surprised to learn a couple things, and I've put them up here because I think it was part of our discussion, and it will get back to what I was talking about in terms of the rules and how we want to issue our zoning in town. So a few things that came about from the Cptc is that granting a use variance will likely conflict with the community's comprehensive plan or master plan. And as we all know, the master plan is the process that we're working on right now. Because if you don't have a solid set of rules and they're always changing, it's very difficult to be able to plan your future based on moving targets. The next part was that use variances circumvent the statutory procedure for changing zoning. So really, like I talked about, the voters here are the ones that create the rules, and when we don't have that process, it really creates a different environment for where if a smaller group of people are able to make the exceptions, it excludes us from that process. And then the zoning adoption and amendment process at annual town meeting is considered thorough and procedurally fair. By contrast, when granted by a 5-member ZBA, neither legislative action, which is our 2/3 vote, nor Attorney General review is required, which, if you didn't realize, once we go through town meeting, the Attorney General reviews all of our zoning bylaws to make sure that they're legal within the state of Massachusetts. The intentionally deliberative process for changing zoning is absent in the variance process. So this causes some problems, and this is what that looks like for you. When you buy your house in Northboro and you come into a neighborhood, you expect to be able to look at this book of rules to understand what can be built next to you, how it can be built, what it looks like. When we allow exceptions to that rules, that creates situations where you may be sitting in your house thinking that nothing's going to be built beside you wouldn't want, and then a use variance could allow for a warehouse to be built next to your house, as has happened to a resident in town from the last use variance that was granted and is currently in appeals court. And now that resident is spending tens of thousands of dollars trying to defend her rights in the area that she thought she was in, which was the residential area. I wanted to bring up another example in terms of what I wanted to do is be able to come with a number to say that there are many towns in the state of Massachusetts that have done away with use variances because we keep hearing that we're in the minority. Without being able to go through 350 different bylaws, I did want to point out our neighbor, Southborough, who went through this process in 2016. In their newspaper, they had that Southborough was among the minority of towns in the state that still allow the ZBA to grant a variance. They wanted to put zoning back into the hands of voters, and they did so in 2016. They decided 481 in favor and only 25 opposed to the notion that voters should really be the ones responsible for zoning and creating the rules in their town. So with that, I'll leave it to you and answer any questions.
Thank you. May I hear from the Municipal Code and Bylaw Committee, please?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The Municipal Code and Bylaw Committee recommends this article. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions, any discussion about Article 36? If you wish.
I would actually not prefer that.
I already granted her that opportunity.
I think it's disrespectful as a member of the ZBA who does not create zoning rules to come and speak to this bylaw up at the podium.
I have already made a decision on that. We're going to go that way. The microphone is yours.
I don't want to offend.
I'm offended now.
It's not that big of a deal. Fran Backstrand, 76 Cedar Hill Road, and yes, Ms. Martinek is correct. I am a member of the Zoning Board of Appeals. I do want to tell you, though, that there is no circumventing Mass General Law with the use variance authority at the Northborough Zoning Board of Appeals. Right in Mass General Law, Chapters 40A, there are 17 sections. One of them is Section 10, and it is about variances. And it specifically says that use variances are allowed by local ordinance. There are other variances that are required by statutory laws, but the use variance is an option for the community. It's not circumventing anything. It's not a power grab. It's a tool for development. Now, you don't have to like it. We can vote for it or against it. I don't care that Southborough doesn't have it. I don't care that Millbury does. I live in Northboro, and what I am trying to help you understand is that in Northboro, it has been a useful tool. 329 West Main Street was not a use variance. So if it comes up, it was not a use variance granted by the Zoning Board of Appeals. I will tell you in the last 9 years, 152 applications came before the Zoning Board of Appeals. 25 of them were for use variances. One of them was for a woman who lives in Milk Porridge, who is a renter and wanted to open an in-home professional business. Our zoning bylaws require that it be a homeowner-occupied business. Her landlord said it was fine with him, none of the neighbors complained, but she had to come before the zoning board for a use variance so that she could run her professional office out of her home. It was that simple. I actually have all of them almost memorized, all that we've done in the last 9 years, but I want you to just think about this. We don't have to do it. We can come to town meeting, just like we did this time with the breweries. Did we miss any opportunities in the last 2 years? I don't think so. So it did work, right? We added that use. But right now, and everybody that was here last night, we heard a lot about White Cliffs, okay? White Cliffs is primarily in the residential C area. And in the residential C area, it has a lot of restrictions on how it can be reused. We bought it with Cptc money, so it can't be destroyed. We have to reuse and repurpose that building. In absence of a use variance, if somebody came before us and said, I'd like to open an art studio, a museum, let's see, a retail store, an art gallery, a bed and breakfast, a restaurant, a catering service, or more, they would be told no, unless next year at town meeting, we rezone that for a business or we change the use table for residential C to allow those things. But remember, that's not going to be just for that area. That's going to be every single residential C area, zoning area in the town. So again, it's an option. You don't have to buy it, but it is available, and when you make your decision, it should be based on factual information. Thank you.
Just a point of clarification. I wasn't saying that use variances are against Mass General law, that circumvents Mass General law. It circumvents the legislative body, which are the people here tonight. And in terms of tools, other towns are using tools such as overlays, where you could do something like White Cliff with an overlay district, which just means you could create different zoning on top of underlying zoning, which is a more up-to-date tool that we could use without creating a use variance.
Over here, please.
Hi, Amy Paretsky, 47 Indian Meadow Drive. And I just wanted to speak to a couple. I know Fran knows her cases, and I know some of them too. And I'm just questioning the one in the neighborhood why I would need a use variance when we have a bylaw for home occupations. And speaking to White Cliffs, it's half business east and it's half residential. There is an article coming up, it might be the next one, where a person came in front of the board and wanted to move their property into downtown business because they were on the line of both, which White Cliffs is. And within a couple months, we added into the town meeting, so it's on the warrant article for tonight. It might even be the next one. So if there's a concern about White Cliffs, it could be moved into the business east, which it's connected to. But as far as use variances, I have nothing against the board. This doesn't have to do with any board. But when you're hit with it, a use variance allows any use in any zone. So if you're a resident You could have an industrial use, a commercial use next door to you, and anybody can ask for anything. And it would be up to the board to decide whether or not that use is allowed. And if you're like me, my home is my biggest investment. So to have to go through that process and fight for my property and say, you know, I really don't want that movie theater next door, it's very stressful. And so that's why I would be voting for this article.
Right over here, please.
Mark Rutan, 22 Hemlock Drive. I'm also a member of the ZBA. I'd like to point out a few things about this. A large part of this rests on the fact that the use variance is overriding the elected or the laws passed by the majority of the citizens here. I'd like to point out the fact that all our variances are overrides of the past rules passed by the citizens. That would be the dimensional variances, the setback variances. These are all encoded. We hear something in front of our board. We make a reasonable decision that it's respectful of the neighborhood to violate the rules in this small part and allow the variance to proceed. The use variance is much like the dimensional variance that allows you to put your shed a little bit closer to the property line than it should be, or something like that. We have a hearing where people do testify whether this is an impact into it, so it's not like there's going to be a movie theater put in next to your home. That's ridiculous. I'd also like to say that one of the people who wrote the municipal code told me that the whole variance section was written specifically to be too strict, with the safeguard that you could propose variations to go in front of the ZBA to modify these laws. And so the use variance, the fact that it's going in front of the ZBA, is not a violation of the intent of the law, but instead is an implementation of the intent of the law to allow us to hear something, say it's reasonable, it makes sense for the neighborhood, much like my fellow ZBA member pointed out, that you could have a owner-occupied in-home business, but you can't have a renter-occupied in-home business. That was the need for that was the cause for the use variance in this case. It was reasonable, we heard it, we passed it. That's the kind of thing we passed. We don't put movie theaters next to homes. Thank you.
Right over here, please.
Yeah, John Marr, 44 Western Terrace. Could I just ask a question for clarification? How does one become a member of the Zoning Appeals Board?
It's an appointment by the Board of Selectmen.
Okay, so it's not an elected official.
It's not.
Thank you.
Right over here, please.
Hi, yes, Chris Terrio from 136 Rice Ave in Northboro. I just wanted to share a couple quick anecdotes about dealing with zoning boards. I first lived in a house over in Hudson where, the small business next to me went before the board, and they were originally in there due to a variance, which we're allowed to operate. X years later, they went back and said, hey, we want to expand. And, that appeals board said, hey, you're grandfathered in, we can make this judgment. You can triple the size of your business. So what ended up happening is, my backyard was literally in the shadow of like their 4,000 square foot building all of a sudden. And after months of going to the board meetings and the zoning, with the neighborhood, nothing we could do about it. Ended up having to, leave that house. Luckily, brought me to Northboro, and I love it here. On the flip side of that story, right, the neighbor across the street was, bought the house, bought the land, wanted to open up a business there. They went through the process, and, the neighborhood wasn't a fan, and so people went, and ultimately they weren't allowed the variance. So great, right? I have two stories here where on both sides, like, lost one, kind of won the other, but at the same time, like, that's a neighbor. We care about our neighbors. And he moved his family into that home with the hopes that he could open up a business and do his thing. You know, laws like this or updates like this to the rules, like, remove the ambiguity and save people that heartache, right? You can't do anything about a business that's grandfathered in, but he wouldn't have had to, but my neighbor wouldn't have had to make, you know, that investment, and only to find out that he couldn't then recuperate on it and perform his business if it was, you know, hard-coded and available for him to read before he even made an offer on the house. So I think rules like this really help to, like, make sure people know what they're getting into, know what they can and can't do, whether it's a business or, you know, a resident who wants to do something, right? You know, it's up there, you read it, you understand it. The realtor would have told him, maybe don't put an offer on this house, kind of thing. And, you know, stuff like this is good, right? Coding, messaging, sorry, I'm like a data analyst and a reporter, like, stuff like this is important, right? Get it written down and good. So this is probably for the best. Thank you.
Right over here, please.
Mr. Moderator, Ken Picard, 78 Whitney Street. From a previous occupation in another town, I was a planning board member for 10 years. Zoning variances that do with occupancy are antiquated. The process should be a special permit granted by the ZBA, which put clarification on use, terms, and longevity. The antiquated usage of variances when it comes to usage is just not the way we should be doing this. It should be more through a special permit, which is still through the ZBA, but it is a more current statute-regulated process. Thank you.
Thank you. Right over here, please.
William Pierce, 367 Whitney Street. I just want to add a little bit. I know there's been a lot of talk about the Massachusetts law in regards to this, and I did a little bit of research. The Massachusetts law actually requires, not suggests, requires that a use variance only be granted after a public hearing, and it only finds that adherence to the ordinance would be substantial hardship to the property owner, the request would not pose a substantial detriment to the public, and the request does not go against the purpose of the ordinance. And I think that third one is very important. The purpose of the ordinance is what we all vote on, right? That's what we voted on with the master plan. That's what we vote on our bylaws. So use variances in and of themselves go against that ordinance. The other thing is, a lot of people talk about business and how, you know, we want to bring in business into Northboro. Use variances do not bring in business, and I'll tell you why. Because use variances produce the unknown for business. Business will not come into town. We just approved a microbrewery to be able to come into town by zoning, right, by right. Now, why was there not one that could have come in via use variance before this? Because all the towns around us already allow it, and we don't. We were the unknown until now, right? So if we want to bring in business, we have to welcome business. We have to tell them by our zoning that we want you here. A use variance requires them to go up to a group that is not elected, that is appointed, and then make their request and hope it goes through. Thank you.
Right over here, please.
Scott Stockland, 12 Patrick Drive. So I'm going to tell you what this feels like in real life, not hypotheticals or theoreticals. So I live in a neighborhood, and next to our neighborhood, there was a company that came in a couple of years ago, and they were looking to build a radiation sterilization facility right next to our residential property lines. At the end of the day, they They landed in front of the Zoning Board of Appeals. For what reason, I don't exactly know why the building wouldn't fit, or maybe it didn't meet the requirements, but for whatever reason, they landed in front of the Zoning Board of Appeals. And there were 3 requirements that were necessary for them to be able to get this variance so they could build their radiation facility. One of which was that they had to demonstrate a significant financial hardship that they would incur if the variance was not granted. And I sat in this meeting and I listened to the Zoning Board of Appeals officer ask the corporate attorney, if we deny this, would you be significantly financially adversely affected? The attorney looked at the Zoning Board of Appeals officer and said, yes. They thought about it for a few minutes, and the Zoning Board of Appeals said, okay, you're approved. And that's what happened. And then ultimately, a year or 2 later, they landed in front of the planning board, and the planning board found that this company's use of this property was not in compliance with our current zoning laws. And now we have a conflict between what the Zoning Board of Appeals told this company and what the planning board told this company. And quite frankly, we have a planning board here in town that was elected, and if I recall correctly, elected by a wide margin, and I think we should let them do their job. Thank you.
Right over here, please.
Kailash Viswanathan, 14 Buckhill Road. Again, that was, I was going to say some of what he said and what Karina actually said here is we face reality, and I want everyone to know that. You know, the zoning board probably sits, talks, decides, but we're the ones who face the problem. Since yesterday, we've been talking about change, and this is all about change, right? And I think we have to think about the future and not think about today, right? We're residents, we pay our taxes, and I think we have to face reality. And when the zoning board says they're reasonable, I think that's according to them, definitely not according to our residents. Thank you.
Over here, please.
Thank you. Michael Burnswag, 4 Jenkins Drive here in Northboro. My wife and I have lived in the town for over 15 years. We built our home here. I have my business in the community and respect all the guidelines and rules and regulations that have been set up and comply with them. I think at the end of the day, it's very simple. As residents, if we've all agreed to a book of guidelines and we've all voted on it, it's really everyone's interest. And at the end of the day, I think that if there are any changes or variances to what we've all agreed upon, we should all reconvene and be involved in the process. I don't think it should be a appointed type position or an arbitrary decision by a small minority of individuals within the town. I think everybody within the town should have an equal say. Thank you.
Right over here.
Fran Backstrand, 76 Cedar Hill Road. Just for clarification, for the Whitney Street property, that was not a use variance, that was a setback. Taking away the use variance authority of the zoning board would not have changed the fact that that property was looking for a dimensional setback variance to the property line between industrial and residential of less than 100, I think it's 100,000 feet. And just for one other point, and then I'll let you decide. Up on Barefoot Road, U-Haul wanted to come and build their facility. Leasing, storing, and one other thing was not allowed. Oh, sale, leasing, and storing of vehicles is not allowed in our industrial area. So they had to come for a use variance. We granted them the use variances. They're up on Barefoot Road. We get about $1.2 million a year in taxes from that piece of property. The only other one I'll tell you is our food pantry. There was donated property in downtown neighborhood for our food pantry. Everyone agreed it was a better location, it was bigger, it was private, and it was free. It was not an allowed use in our use table. So the family came before us and said, would you allow this use so that we can donate this property to the town of Northboro's food pantry and open up a safe, private place? And we said yes.
Right over here, please.
Hi, folks. Laura Folsom, 4 Laurel Avenue, here in Northborough. I feel like a newcomer. I've been in town for 9 years. I'm honestly shocked that I pay $14,000 a year in taxes to this town, and I'm just finding out that there is a select group, the Zoning Board of Appeals, that is not elected. Obviously, we do things by committee in our town, except this elite group can make choices. I'm really surprised, and quite frankly, I'm not pleased.
Right over here, please.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Marshall Gould, 41 West Street. I'm an attorney. I practice at my office in Worcester, but I do quite a bit of zoning in a lot of towns in central Massachusetts, mostly Worcester County. I will tell you that one of the biggest projects I have done in Northboro would not have been done without use variances, and that is Northborough Crossings, where people generally know it as that's where Wegmans and BJ's are located, and BJ's Gas, and that whole area, that was a variety of special permits, and there were some variances which included use variances to allow certain businesses. That property was zoned industrial, underlying zoning was industrial, and I think people have seen throughout various parts of town that if you have a zone that is either commercial or industrial, then businesses or industry can go there. And some of the problems that we're having now with industrial properties are because if something is zoned industrial, then you cannot put the conditions on it that you are allowed to put on if somebody applies for a variance, unless they have to go for a special permit as well. Now, I've been involved in a small number of use variances in the town of Northborough, even though I've been practicing here for over 40 years. I think I do as much zoning as anybody, and I'm going to tell you, it saddens me to see a conflict between the planning board and the zoning board, because I know how hard all of the people on the planning board work. I was on the planning board for 2 terms, admittedly back in the 80s, and I know how hard the people on the zoning board of appeals work. And yes, they are appointed, but they are not a select group to act arbitrarily. The zoning statute in Massachusetts sets out that towns shall have a zoning board of appeals. And there is no question that the zoning bylaw is set out by the town, but if you were to ask a typical resident in town about what all the rules are and what you can do, people might know, oh, it's residential, or it's commercial, or it's industrial. But I'm going to tell you that over the years, there are so many cross uses in all of these properties. Some are grandfathered, some are based on just what has happened over the course of the time, and some from before the zoning bylaw took effect. I have been approved by the planning board for some things, and I've been denied by the planning board. When I say I, my clients. And the same with the zoning board. I want you to understand some things. Our zoning board in Northborough has 5 members that are not arbitrarily appointed. They are appointed because they have been proven that they have common sense. They're residents of the town. They're typically not new residents of the town. They've lived here for a while. But I have seen them in action, the same as I have seen the planning board. They are out to protect the surrounding properties. Sometimes it's residents, sometimes it's other businesses. The same as the planning board is here to protect not just residents, but businesses and industry in the same manner. Use variances are specifically allowed, as was pointed out, by Fran Backstrom earlier, if the bylaw allows it. Now, lawyers and planners call the variance tool a safety valve. The example was given of White Cliffs. There are other examples in other towns that I've been involved in where a property could not be used in a reasonable way without a use variance. I don't want anybody to think that this is a group of people who get together in dark rooms and change the zoning rules in Northboro. That's not the case. If you want to observe the zoning boards, please observe them. I know all of them, and they've been both favorable to me, and they're always respectful, but they don't always agree with what you're asking for. But when they do grant a use variance, it's either because of something that was mentioned that has very little impact, or something, as in the case of Northborough Crossing, where we had discussed doing a zone change and coming to town meeting. But when you get a zone change, you can't put in the conditions that will then protect the town or the surrounding properties. That's what Chapter 40A, Section 10 does. And they can't just give it because they want to give it. It's supposed to be based on a hardship arising out of the soil conditions, shape, or topography of the lot. Now, a lot of times, if it's a matter of a shed being close to a line, they might stretch it a little bit. But if neighbors come in and they oppose that shed, well, nobody's going to get that easily, and I've seen the zoning board turn those down. Now, for use variances, I have seen them grant some, I've seen them turn some down. I haven't seen any that, in my opinion, would have been detrimental to the surrounding properties, abutters or abutters of abutters within 300 feet that all have to be notified of the hearing. So if you get a notice for somebody seeking a variance, or for that matter, even a special permit, whether it's with the zoning board or the planning board, you should go to the hearing and find out what's going on. You will see that this is not a backroom secret deal of some, as it was referred to, elite members of town. This is all done statutorily allowed, and what's being asked is that you take away that safety valve, and personally I feel it's not the right thing to do. It is sparingly used. The case law says it is to be sparingly used, and if in 9 years, if in 9 years there have been, Fran, what did you say, 100? That's not a lot in 9 years. So, and the planning board gets notice, and I know that this planning board is very, very diligent. They look at them, they give their comments to them. So please don't think this is done behind doors in a dark room with nobody observing. It is, and I ask that the use variances continue to be allowed.
Just a point of, I just wanted to clarify, as I stated in the beginning, I want to make sure that there's no misunderstanding. This isn't a statement on the ZBA's, this bylaw is not about the ZBA's validity as their role in town, or whether or not they do a good job or they're good people or anything like that. This is purely about a zoning philosophy and whether or not zoning belongs in the hands of voters, or if we want to have a smaller board be able to issue use variances. It's not any statement about the ZBA. I want to make sure that's clear.
There are 3 more questions, and then we'll move the question. Please.
Thank you. Lisa Maselli, 13 Maple Street. I have sat in on very many ZBA meetings, some planning board meetings throughout 20 years, as Marshall Gould has. I've probably sat with many with Marshall Gould. I think the use variance has been a question I know I presented in 2012 at this town meeting about removing a use variance at the behest of a few people on the planning board. And I think it's time to put the law back into the hands of the people. The planning board, who's voted by the people, entrusts them to plan for their future. And there's been a lot of different things that have happened through this use variance that we're not going to go down the list and spend a lot of time trying to do numbers and promise it was wonderful. I've seen the room filled with neighbors. I've seen neighbors have to file lawsuits and spend their own money to protect themselves. And I think that that's got to stop, and we have to get back to doing it as we've all liked to have laws that we can count on. So my recommendation is to vote in favor of this, and thank you for listening.
We have 2 more questions. This is one of them.
Okay, hi, Amy Paretsky, 47 Indian Meadow Drive. I just wanted to speak about the use variance and Northborough Crossing. I wasn't involved in the planning board or the zoning board back then, but I do know from classes that I have attended that the use variance for Northborough Crossing is mentioned as the biggest use variance that was ever considered in the state of Massachusetts, which is concerning. It's such a big parcel, like it should have come in front of town meeting for everybody to have a say. And unlike what Marshall said, you could change that whole area to commercial. We've talked about it quite a bit. And it can be by special permit, and that's how you put the conditions on it. And so that's all I wanted to say. It still would have happened. For those of you who love Wegmans and love Northborough Crossing, if there wasn't a use variance, it still could have happened.
Yes.
Sherry Clark, 6 River Street. I'm just looking for clarification. When I moved to town, White Cliffs was operating as a business, so I'm curious as to what changed or if I'm misunderstanding something. And as well as the food pantry building, my understanding was there was already an attorney's office there and it was operating as a business. So I feel confused because those are being called residential and I've always seen them as commercial.
I don't have the history on that. I'm sorry.
So obviously, no one wants to make a comment on that question. Would you please?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Fran Baxter on 76 Cedar Hill Road. I can't say, because White Cliffs was here before me, somebody who got married in the 70s would have to tell you how that worked. But I can tell you that a food pantry is not on the list of uses allowed in downtown neighborhood, which is what that area is. And again, other businesses already belong there, but food pantry was not in our definitions, and so therefore was not on our use table. So it could not be allowed as a use without us either granting the use variance or waiting till the next year to add food pantry or some other definition that it would fit in at the next year's town meeting. That's the best I can do.
Okay, we have discussed this thoroughly. For Article 36, this is what you're voting on. I move the town vote to amend Part 7 of the Northborough Town Code, the Northborough zoning bylaw, Section 7-03-030, and Section 7-05-010, by deleting the text shown in strike-through and adding the text shown as underlined, as set forth in the warrant. As all motions this evening have been, this is a 2/3 vote. All those in favor, please raise your cards. And those opposed? I'm going to ask the tellers to do this. It's closer than I want it to be. Everyone's card should be down now. Okay, our tellers are in place. All those in favor, please raise your cards and keep them up high, please. Do we have a count?
Did I say 15, 1-5? 1-6, thank you very much. 12, 1-2.
40.
Say it one more time.
40.
40, 4-0, thank you. 36. Thank you.
And that is the count. May I have all those opposed, please raise your cards and keep them up. Do we have the count?
40. Thank you. 11. 15. 15. And 13. Thank you. 104 to 79 does not meet the 2/3.
The vote was 104 in favor, 79 opposed. I declare that the article does not pass by the required 2/3 vote.
Motion for a recount?
Did you say recount or reconsider?
Motion for a recount.
This was a substantial difference for the 2/3 vote. May I ask why you're asking for the recount? The microphone is up front.
From the viewpoint of standing up here, I have the benefit of seeing everybody, and the visual difference did not appear that substantial to me when looking out into the audience.
That's why we had the tellers.
I wonder if it's a scientific process versus handing in our ballots for some sort of recount.
Say that again. You got to use the microphone, please.
I'm wondering if it would be more accurate if people handed in their ballots so that it could be counted versus raising hands.
Well, this is the process that we're using for this meeting.
So I guess there's a motion and a second.
But I've made the decision that the numbers were so far apart that a recount wouldn't really accomplish anything. We are now on Article 37. Reconsider. If you shout out, I can't understand what you're saying. Okay?
Why would you leave doubt in people's minds? Take a vote.
We have to decide we're going to do that. I have a question. Whoever requested reconsider.
Right here.
Is this, and it's been seconded. I have to ask you, is this because of some new information that you have?
We just want to lock in the vote.
Okay. For those of you not familiar with that practice, once a decision has been made, it can be reconsidered only once. It is counterintuitive because those in favor of reconsideration are asking that we open things up again. Those that say let the past vote ride will say no to reconsideration. Is that clear?
Yes.
So we have a motion and a second for reconsideration. I will ask all those in favor of reconsideration, please raise your cards. And counsel, this is a simple motion. This is a 2/3 vote. I just wanted to make sure we were right on that. Those in favor, please hold your cards up. And those opposed? I hate to do this to the tellers, but it's way too close for me to count. Okay, are the tellers in place? I will ask all those in favor of reconsideration, please raise your cards and keep them up. Are the tellers ready?
6, 10, 40, 22, thank you.
Okay, please put your cards down. All those opposed to reconsideration, please raise your hands.
Fifty-five, 0. 12. 25. And 18, thank you.
The vote for reconsideration, yes, 78, no, 105. The motion for reconsideration does not pass. Actually, I declare that the motion for reconsideration does not meet the 2/3 requirement for passage. Moving to Article 37.
I hope this goes much easier. Hi,
I'm Millie Milton with the Planning Board. I move the town vote to amend Northboro zoning map by removing land located at and known as 37 South Street, Assessors Map 63, Parcel 175 from the General Residential Zoning District, and placing it in Downtown Business Zoning District as set forth in the warrant.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded.
So this article was first brought to the planning board's attention back in 2020, and it concerns a .36 acre parcel of property located at 37 South Street. The intent of this article is to create an amendment to the zoning map that will place this parcel in downtown business. Previous to 2009, this property has been zoned as downtown business or split. In 2009, the last major rezoning was placed entirely in residential. It's not clear why this decision was made, and this is an attempt to correct that, what was likely an oversight in the zoning. This building has been used as a commercial since 1955, and the recent occupants being attorneys and engineering firms. The issue with the current zoning in this particular parcel is that every time a new tenant comes in and leases the space, the occupant must go before the ZBA to get permission for a variance. This actually presents a time and financial encumbrance to the landowner and prospective tenants. Letters of support were received from all 3 abutting property owners, and the planning board voted unanimously in favor of this action.
Thank you. May I hear from Municipal Code and Bylaw Committee, please?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The Municipal Code and Bylaw Committee unanimously recommends this article. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions or discussion about Article 37? Yes.
Thank you, Fran Baxter on 76 Cedar Hill Road. I just think it's just kind of funny that we just said it took 2 years for this to be addressed at town meeting, when all along since the 1950s, a use variance granted by the Zoning Board of Appeals allowed it to be used as the business that it was intended to be. But it took, since 2020, I think you just said, the process to bring it here. I think it's kind of ironic.
I appreciate that, Fran. It was brought before us.
Please, please.
I appreciate that, Fran. It was brought before us in 2020, but they did not choose to bring it back until September 2021, just to clarify. So within the 3 months of it coming to us, this was as a warrant on the town meeting. So it's as it should have been. It took 10 years for a use variance continuously having to happen to get here, and that's kind of sad.
Other discussion, questions on Article 37? Hearing none, this is what we're voting on. I move the town vote to amend the Northboro zoning map to remove the land located at and known as 37 South Street, Assessors Map 63, Parcel 175, from the General Residential GR zoning district and place it in the Downtown Business DB zoning district as set forth in the warrant. As we all know, this is a 2/3 vote. Those in favor, please raise your cards. Those opposed? I declare that Article 37 passes by the required 2/3 vote. Article 38.
Good evening. My name is Michelle Gillespie. I reside at 117 Howard Street in Northboro, and I'm a member of the Northboro Planning Board. I make a motion for Article 38. I move the town vote to amend Part 7 of the Northboro Town Code, the Northboro Zoning Bylaw, Section 7-03-50, Site Plan A4, exceptions by deleting the text shown in the strike-through as set forth in the warrant.
Second.
The motion has been made and seconded.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. This is strictly a housekeeping article, and as you can see in your warrant article, that we're simply striking out the words "or two-family dwelling" in the section that says new construction or alteration of a single detached family dwelling or two-family. The words "or two-family" will be stricken out. Shall not be subject to this section except when such alteration is associated with any use other than a single-family dwelling. Again, or two-family is being stricken out. This is brought to our attention from town staff, saying that it's basically a housekeeping thing and should be taken out of the zoning.
May I hear from the planning board on Article 38, please?
You mean the zoning, the municipal code and bylaw?
No, I said the planning board.
The planning board. Oh, the planning board voted in favor of it unanimously.
Thank you. Now it's Municipal Code and Bylaw
Yep.
Committee's turn.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The Municipal Code and Bylaw Committee unanimously recommends this article. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have someone over here?
Can I just ask, can you advance, because we're still looking at Article 37?
Oh, that's not my call.
There you go.
There we are. Any other questions or discussion on Article 38? Hearing none, this is what we're voting on. I move the town vote to amend Part 7 of the Northborough Town Code, the Northborough zoning bylaw, Section 7-03-050, Site Plans A, for exceptions, by deleting the text shown in the strike-through as set forth in the warrant. We know this is a two-thirds vote. All those in favor, please raise your cards. And those opposed? I declare that Article 38 passes by the required two-thirds vote.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Article 39.
Hello again, Carrie Martinek, member of the Planning Board. I move the town vote to amend the town zoning bylaw by adding a new section, 7-10-060, temporary moratorium on distribution and transportation uses, and further, to amend the table of contents to add section 7-10-060, temporary moratorium on distribution and transportation uses, all is set forth in the warrant.
Second, thank you. Motion's been made and seconded.
Great. So the next two articles are related. We're going to specifically cover this one in greater depth, but I wanted to just let everybody get a full context of what we're looking at here. So over the last couple years or so that I've been on the board, we've seen a lot of different applications come in our industrial zone, specifically for warehouse and trucking and distribution. And I think when we think about e-commerce as an industry, it's really way out here. And what we're finding as a board is our bylaws are still way back here. And we're not in a good spot, which allows us to be protected as residents of the town, because our bylaws are not in a spot where we can be proactive rather than reactive. So when you think about e-commerce and all the things we're seeing, there's so much more to come that we haven't even thought about, or maybe we have but seem so far off, like drones or self-driving trucks or robots doing deliveries. So these are things that are happening really fast in our world, but our bylaws aren't at a point where it's helping us as a town when we get these applications. We're just not prepared. So with this bylaw, the first part, so Article 39, the planning board has come forward with a couple different solutions that we wanted to give voters to talk about and discuss what's the best solution for us. So Article 39, we'll talk about as a moratorium as an option, and Article 40, which will come after if we don't vote for the moratorium, which is based more on definitions and our use table. So starting with the moratorium, I wanted to just explain a little bit of what that looks like. So moratoriums, as we've had in the past, would be a hold on a particular kind of use in our town for the period of a year. In that period, we would commit to specific goals. So in this case, we've proposed that we put together a committee to look at several things. And in the warrant, you can see those things specifically listed out, A through, I think, M, or we have quite a list there of different things that we would look at. But primarily the purpose would be to just study the impacts of these uses, learn from what the towns around us are experiencing. I think we've all seen the Amazon cases pop up in the newspaper and what's happening in other towns and how they're responding to them. Also look at data from our regional planning agency. So every area in every region of Massachusetts has a regional planning agency that can really help each region with the things that they're dealing with that are local to them. And our region has been specifically hit hard with trucking and distribution. Also, researching best practices in zoning specific to e-commerce. So this would give us an opportunity to really dive deep into what's happening, what are the best practices from our regional planning agencies, how can we advance our bylaws to a point that at least meets where we are in the world of e-commerce, and maybe even get ahead of it so that we can really be proactive in our own zoning. And when we see these applications in, the board has tools that they can use that make sense for the types of uses that are coming in. It would be a 5-person committee, and it would have representation from residents as well. So we see a lot of the residents that we've heard from tonight that are experiencing these things firsthand. They've participated in some of the things we've seen happen over the last year, like the audit that was recently done on Bartlett Street, or all the great things that the town has actually driven towards this year to kind of evaluate how they're doing. So in the strides that the town made over the course of the year, which included the Board of Selectmen pushing forward some things as well, have we been successful in those things? And should we continue them, try new things, drill down further? This committee would also take a look at cost to benefit. So we want to be mindful of what the revenue is, but we want to also be mindful of what's the cost to the town as well. Interestingly enough, according to the assessor's office, there are in our industrial lots, warehouses make up 68% of our total industrial lots in Northboro. So we should be able to look at that, sit down and really look at that and think about as a town, is that what we want? Is that good for our town? What's the cost of that? What's the benefit of that? So that's an example of some of the things that we would want this committee to do, have the time period of a year. In that year, the boards would not be able to approve these uses. And then they would present at January 1st recommendations to the boards, come back and say, here's what we learned, here are our recommendations. And then the planning board would come back next year with bylaw proposals that then the town would get to vote on. So I think I covered, let me make sure. I think I covered primarily what I wanted to there. And I'd be happy to answer questions. The planning board recommended approval.
Thank you. May I hear from Muni Code and Bylaw, please?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The Municipal Code and Bylaw Committee unanimously recommends passage of this article. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions, discussion on Article 39? Yes, over here.
Hi, Linda Brankel, 3 Little Pond Road. I just have just one question, and I'll sit to take the answer. Is there anything that would stop the formation of this committee without the moratorium?
That's a great question. The planning board does not ordinarily have the authority to create committees outside of through what's enacted in our bylaws. That would be a question for the Board of Selectmen.
Yes.
It's John Wickstead, 2 Surbrook Lane. You know, the town recently had a traffic study done that showed that currently 12% of the traffic, that's, 12%, 1 in 8 vehicles going past the high school driveway is a heavy vehicle. If you haven't driven on Cedar Hill Road recently, between Northboro and Southboro, I suggest you take a ride over there. You know, it's dangerous for all those kids from Southboro, and I know we're Northboro, but all those kids from Southboro are driving past FedEx and A. Dewey Pile and Amazon. And 15 or 20 years from now, we're all going to be gone.
You need to get closer to the microphone, please.
I'm sorry, 15 or 20 years from now, Northboro is going to look different. What I don't want to see is Northboro looking like Saugus, right? Nothing against Saugus, but it's a big industrial area. And Northboro doesn't look like the apple town that it was in 1985. And if we don't get in front of this, it's only going to get worse. So a year is not a long time but it's enough time for us to take a pause and try and come up with some reasonable guidelines for the planning board and the ZBA both to work with in order to try and get ahead of the e-commerce problem that we're going to face. We have middle mile warehouses right now, and for those of you who aren't aware, middle mile warehouses are largely 18-wheelers moving in and out of the vehicles. So they're all 18-wheeler depots. But if we get a last mile facility someplace close by, all those 18-wheelers are going to be headed to the last mile facility. The Greendale Mall is turning into a last mile facility, and the Amazon warehouse is on Bartlett Street. And I can see all those 18-wheelers going right through the center of town and right down Church Street. You know, we have a problem here, and we need to get in front of it. I strongly support the moratorium.
Right here, please.
Mr. Moderator, John Rappa, 105 Western Terrace. I've read through this article numerous times. I've gone back to the planning board's website with various agendas they've had. I've looked over numerous YouTubes, Zooms of their meetings. And I don't think this goes far enough. This says there's been a significant increase in tractor-trailer traffic, but the last mile of deliveries to people's houses, the residents and the businesses of this town are direct and indirect users of e-commerce services. I cite numbers yesterday from Reuters that U.S. trucking downturn foreshadows possible economic gloom, but basically they're saying with the pandemic, truckloads went from more than 1 million loads a day to from 400,000 to 1 million loads a day. I think this moratorium is not effective, should be more like 2 years to be able to study impacts of seasonality with holidays, the post-pandemic impact of that. I also think that the 13 areas mentioned in here call for significant expertise and use of technology that this warehouse traffic and trucking committee probably does not have. And I would urge the rest of the town not to vote for this until more research is done. Thank you.
Right over here, please.
Yeah, my name is Mark Bashur. I'm 24 Main Street. The first town meeting I ever went to was actually 1985. Someone mentioned 1985. And I've seen this town make too many mistakes. And I really want to see this passed because we need a moratorium. Like that man said, let's get in front of this. We've made too many mistakes. We made them in the 80s, and we've made them in very recent years. We made them in the first decade of 2000s. Too many mistakes. Let's get in front of this thing, and I absolutely support Article 39. It's exactly what we need, and whether it goes far enough, it's good. Let's keep it, and please let's use this. So I say yes.
Over here, please.
Hi, Jean Cahill, 1 Thayer Street. And in light of the one-year moratorium, I also echo the concern that it may not be long enough to do the comprehensive study that would be needed in order to capture all of the market forces and where Northboro is geographically and what's happening across the state. For instance, the state of Massachusetts is in a process of having to meet 2030 climate goals. This entails a huge transition in the way that we do transportation. Transportation is the largest sector of our greenhouse gas production. We have just adopted clean truck standards that the state of California has developed, and we're going to be having to transition to medium and heavy-duty electric vehicles. And when the Amazon warehouse was first proposed, my question to the applicant was, how do we plan? We're building things that are going to be obsolete. They're going to be obsolete in a very short time because we're in a time of very rapid economy sector transition. And so what we need to do is to really figure out, like, let's not set up businesses to fail. Let's make sure that they're building for the future and not for the past. So in light of that, I think that's just a whole other incredible, huge aspect of what we're trying to figure out here in our town and in our state and in our world. So I appreciate consideration of extending this from a 1-year to a 2-year moratorium. Thank you.
This is the last one right here.
Yes, hi, Mike. My name is Manny Lopes. I live at 96 Bartlett Street. So I'm seeing all that traffic every day, as are my neighbors. We're living with 24/7, 365, 18-wheelers. It's only getting worse. We all know Amazon's going to be increasing and going full capacity. So I strongly think we need to have a timeout so we can do, as you say, do the prudent actions to see, make sure we get in front of this stuff. We're already living with adverse, impact to our community and the risks associated with it. Now, some of the people say, well, let's wait. Maybe it doesn't go far enough. Maybe it needs to be 2 years. Well, I'm all for doing more, but I sure don't want to wait and let this pass and reject it today and have no moratorium and have another Amazon facility get in while we wait to come up and figure out whether we should go 2 years forward. I say we stop it right now, put the moratorium in place, get in front of this thing for the future, and we can always go back. If we find out we're seeing data that says we need more time, we can come back and ask for more time. But let's not delay it and risk another 2 warehouses coming in the meantime. So I say we should approve this now.
I did forget one point, actually. I wanted to just make sure. For those who don't know where our districts are located, so we actually have them on 2 ends of our town. So a couple of people tonight referenced the high school Bartlett area, but we also have industrial on the other side of town. So the moratorium would actually be in place. So it would cover both sides. And if you think about it, the problem with not having it is if we have warehouse trucking here and trucking here, guess what happens in the middle, right? Right through the center of town. So we really need to make sure that our bylaws are in the best place they can possibly be for us.
Sir, I was about to bring up, I had actually indicated the person in front of you was the last question. If you have something new to add to this, you're welcome.
David Cooley, 280 West Street. I just have a question for Kerry. So do you or anyone in your household currently have an Amazon account?
Well, of course. I think the point is not to make it... So I think the point is not to make it anti-business. I don't think that it's a zero-sum game where you either have to have it or not. I think this is really about making sure our bylaws are caught up to where the industry is so that we're in a good spot. And if we get to that spot with good bylaws, then then maybe we do open that use back up. But we're doing it in a smarter, safer way. We're not just leaving ourselves open to risk. Where our bylaws are today, I'll tell you, I sit at every minute of every hearing, and as a member of the board, I'm telling you that we're at significant risk to not update our bylaws.
Okay, this is what we're voting on for Article 39. I move the town vote to amend the town's zoning bylaw by adding a new Section 7-10-060, temporary moratorium on distribution and transportation uses, and further, to amend the table of contents to add Section 7-10-060, temporary moratorium on distribution and transportation uses, all as set forth in the warrant. As we all know, this is a 2/3 vote. All those in favor, please raise your cards. And those opposed? I'm going to ask the tellers one more time. Okay, tellers are in place. All those in favor, please raise your cards. Sir, while the tellers are working, please refrain. Thank you. Are the tellers ready?
21. 13. 44. 44. And 45, thank you.
And all those opposed, please raise your cards. Okay, tellers, are you ready?
36. 10. 12. 8. Thank you.
The vote was 123 yes, 66 no. That does not meet the requirement of the two-thirds vote. The article does not, I declare the article does not meet the requirements of the two-thirds vote.
Plan B.
Article 40, please.
I move the town vote to amend Part 7 of the Northborough Town Code, the Northborough zoning bylaw, Section 7-05-020, clarification of uses, I, industrial uses, 5, distribution and transportation uses, and Section 7-05-030, Table of Uses Part B, commercial and industrial districts, by deleting the text shown in strike-through and adding the text shown as underlined as set forth in the warrant. So this is Plan B. Oh, excuse me. I didn't have a second.
Do we have a second?
Second.
So as mentioned, we came to town meeting tonight with two different solutions, and in thinking that maybe a moratorium would be something that may not pass, we wanted to provide a second option that could provide somewhat of a protection just in the interim, although perhaps not as much as we had hoped with a moratorium, where we could at least put something in place as we work towards getting this in a spot where it's beneficial to everyone in town. So in this case, what we're proposing to do is really refine what we have for our definitions of warehouses. Right now, it's really consolidated into two big blocks. And that can be really difficult, and there's a lot of interpretation associated with that. And what we're seeing other towns do is they're breaking it down into smaller pieces. As the industry evolves, the types of uses are evolving, the types of warehouses, the types of trucking models. I think a resident brought up the last mile distribution, middle mile. So it's really evolving in the terminology. So what this bylaw hopes to do is further refine our warehouse definitions and break that down into a couple different smaller pieces. So you'll see here we have fulfillment center, package delivery facility, delivery station, and really this just better aligns us with modern day trends. Then if you look at our use table, what we've done is, about to fall over. While we're working through our, as we move forward with different applications, and we build out these definitions, in our use table, we've built them out as currently the definitions we added are not allowed. And the reason that we've done that is because we'd like to still allow for that time for further research, as I talked about before, just figuring out the impact and that cost-benefit analysis. And then in the interim, we can work to try to update our bylaws just to protect everybody in the best interest for everyone, residents, business alike. So what you'll see, if you're looking at your warrant, you can see the definitions, which have been further expanded on. And then you'll see what we refer to as our use table, and you can look by district, so you can see by, and so you'll see I is industrial, for example, and you can see what's allowed and not allowed. So in this case, for those additional definitions, we would propose to make them not allowed as we further fine-tune our bylaws. Hopefully for next year, we can come back with some different options for everybody to consider. The Planning Board did recommend adoption of this article.
Thank you. And may I hear from Muni Code and Bylaw Committee, please?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The Municipal Code and Bylaw Committee unanimously recommends this article. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or discussion on Article 40, please?
Sorry, Fran Baxter on 76 Cedar Hill Road. Just so that I understand, in our current zoning, we only have two definitions under transportation and distribution uses, warehouse and then trucking, rail freight, blah, blah, blah. And those are currently in industrial allowed by right. This new warrant is changing those two to by special permit, adding 3 new definitions that are not allowed at all.
No, I think that's an old copy of the bylaws book. Those are all special permits now in industrial. The blue book, is that the blue book?
Was the one that
we haven't gotten one in a little while. But I think their updated bylaws are actually all special permits in industrial.
Okay, so we're spreading it, we're making the definitions more specific.
That's
instead
right.
of that one line being
That's
blah, blah,
right.
blah, blah.
Yep.
And then just because we're just testing the definitions, we're saying
That's
they're not
right.
allowed.
That's right.
Why
So-
would we say by special permit?
So our philosophy when we talked about this was because it's something new. We wanted to be able to have that opportunity to just make sure things were, to whatever research we could do in the meantime, or figure out what other towns are doing, or just anything that could help us figure out, before we just threw the definitions out there. This was really our plan B.
Yep.
So we were hoping to really have the research through the moratorium. But in lieu of that, this is at least a way to stop what's happening, or at least at that level, at the intense uses.
Mm-hmm.
So we considered it by intensity. So the existing definitions are less intense in our minds, and the actual use table should be the same for the existing definitions. It's just the new definitions that we would want to take time to think about.
All right, and just one follow-up. Anything that's currently in play or has been approved is this does not impact. This is for future.
Yeah, that's right. And we had a good conversation about that because town council actually brought up the issue of possible non-conforming uses. So we did have a discussion about the impact of what was there already.
Yes, over here.
Sorry, so just a point of clarification, having watched, my new hobby, planning board meetings and ZBA meetings, when the applicants come before the board, they have to tell you what they're coming to the board for. And currently, they just say, we're coming for a warehouse, but they don't have any obligation to explain what it is that they're going to do. And this would allow for more definitions so that they would have to be more specific. Is that correct?
That's right, yeah. So it would be by this definition. That's how the zoning enforcement officer would take a look and decide what use they fall into.
Right, so it's a way to stop people from just saying, we're going to put a warehouse in and then putting in a distribution.
That's right, yeah. And as I mentioned before, because e-commerce has changed so much, the variety that they can pick from has changed so much. So we're at least trying to keep up with that at a minimum.
Well, I would lastly point out, again, that the traffic studies all have to be done for these properties that come into town. And when a big company comes to town, they have to do a traffic study to show the implication of it. And they can pick from a huge variety of standards that they choose. And they always choose the lowest standard traffic. This would stop that kind of process as well. Thank you.
Over here, please.
Rick Leaf, 30 Wiles Farm Road, Northboro. I guess my impression of this is the way the use table is now worded is that the new definitions are not permitted, and they would not be permitted until subsequent zoning was filed
to do something differently with them. So at this point, we basically have a permanent prohibition on these three new definitions in the town. The prior article proposed a one-year moratorium with the agreement that new zoning would be brought forward in a year. This proposal says that these uses would be not permitted basically until new zoning was brought forward, and there's no timetable now as to when that may be done.
So that is true, but since the moratorium has not passed, now we're looking at baby stepping into something that could help us prevent any further impact, whereas we don't have our bylaws, we're in a spot that we would prefer them to be. So this just gives us that extra time to come forward, hopefully for next year to decide, okay, this use looks like, this intensity of use looks okay, let's do this special permit. Or just, and taking the time too to look at the things that the town's already put in place over the last year. Did it work? And if it did, then maybe there's less worry about allowing that use, say start by special permit next year, maybe, and so on, as we just kind of baby step towards it.
Well, I guess I wouldn't see this so much as a baby step. I think it's a bigger step than the moratorium was. The moratorium was a temporary restriction on these kind of uses, and this is a more permanent restriction. So given the fact that the last vote was not in favor of a moratorium, my feeling would be that if in fact people were not in favor of the moratorium, that they should not be in favor of this also, and that there's nothing preventing the planning board in the next year, even without these new uses being allowed or not allowed and just leaving the zoning the way it is, the planning board can still construct a study, come back to the town in the next year with new permanent zoning changes for review. So I would view this as being pretty much the same as the moratorium, the only difference being there's no time limit on when these would change. So if you voted against the moratorium, I'd recommend voting against this also. Thanks.
So
Right over here.
I'd like to say first that it didn't pass by 2 votes, so it wasn't an overwhelming decision not to go with the moratorium, which I, of course, would have liked to have seen. One of the things that keeps happening is the correlation between warehousing and tax dollars. And everybody seems to think that when there's a warehouse, we're going to make a lot more money and it's going to help defray our taxes. But what happens is when you go into a warehouse and you don't have to say who the tenant is, your tax base is on the building and the land, not on the tenant. Amazon is a tenant. It doesn't own the land. It's not responsible for paying all the extra tax dollars. It's also not responsible to pay for any mitigation. What they paid for this time around was out of the goodness of their heart. There was no need to do that. If we continue to let warehouses come in and be built with no known tenants, we open ourselves up to even more problems and no controls over those problems. And I think that there's something to be said about having to make your tax dollar work for you. By having an open warehouse with no known tenant is not going to do that, because you're going to have more police coming down, more problems coming in, more complaints from the residents, and it's just not a good idea. I would vote for Article 40 now that you passed over the moratorium.
Right over here, please.
Marshall Gould, 41 West Street. Again, I want to say, I know all the hard work that the planning board has put into this, and I don't want to make it sound like I'm saying you're not doing a good job. You're recognizing a problem and you're trying to deal with it. But what I want people to understand, I look at it from the point of view of people I know who own land or who own buildings or who have businesses, and how is this going to affect them? So if we look at the definitions, and I think, Kerry, you did a good job of explaining that e-commerce and regular commerce are changing. Used to be, if you were to go 20, 30 years ago when we wanted something, we would go to Spags, or we would go to Walmart, or we would go to some big store and we would get it. So that's the definition that you're putting forth here for warehouse, where goods, products, or materials are received and primarily distributed to a single or narrow group of retailers, wholesalers, or business clients. But commerce is changing, and now, I'm not trying to be sarcastic, but You pointed out, everybody buys through Amazon, or they now get their TV online, and people, especially in the pandemic, they weren't going to stores. They were ordering everything online. So a lot of the warehouses have already modified their use. And some of those have modified their use where there are online orders coming in, not just from stores, but from consumers, and they have to be sent out in some way. And I'm very concerned about if the definition of a warehouse over time, and it's not going to suddenly go from a warehouse selling to stores to a warehouse like an Amazon selling to consumers, but over time, little changes occur. And sometimes it's going to be warehouse under the strict definition, and other times there might be portions of it that come under the definition of the fulfillment center, package freight delivery, or delivery station. It's the way the world is changing. We can't say to those warehouses, okay, now you have to go out of business because the model that you were working on doesn't work anymore. I would suggest, I've seen the planning board in action. You are thorough, you ask a lot of questions, and the questions you ask, honestly, are questions that didn't need to be asked 20 or 30 years ago. We didn't have some of the traffic issues we have now, and we don't have the type of commerce that we have now. What I least like about this article, whether people vote for it or not, is on the last three items, even in an industrial zone, you say no, no, no. And I think you are devaluing industrial property by limiting some of these uses. I would suggest the planning board consider, if you're going to do this at all, make it by the planning board has to issue a special permit where you can put on those conditions. I'm not suggesting you make it automatic, like the old bylaw said. Right now, it says warehouse, and Kerry, you pointed it out, by special permit. That's why we have boards, and that's why boards are more educated on today's world than they were 20 or 30 years ago when this world didn't exist. So I'm opposed to it primarily for that reason, because it's too negative to say, nope, those industrial lands, forget the business uses, but for industrial, and it's been talked about at various meetings for the, I mean, I understand the truck traffic problem on the easterly part of town between Bartlett and Lyman, but if you go to the industrial properties on the more westerly part of town, they're right near Route 9. Most of that traffic is going to go Route 9. So if you're concerned about these other three issues because of fear that they're all going to go through the center of town, I don't think that's going to be accurate. So at least that would make me vote against this. Thank you.
Right over here, please.
John Rappa, 105 Western Terrace. I would reiterate that one of the focal points of the planning board is the support of the master plan, and a major chunk of the master plan is both residential and commercial economic development in this town. The last major piece of economic growth is yards from here on Bartlett Street. This would greatly reduce that and impact revenue to this town.
And you, sir.
Yeah, Dario DeMar, Fairway Drive. I'm an architect and planner. I've probably been in front of, I don't know, 400 or 500 planning boards and zoning boards trying to get projects approved, so I'm 99.9% on the side of the developers. And in this case, I also own a business in Northboro and live in Northboro. I think we talk about, trying to help the businesses, and of course I'm all for that. There's a couple things that I haven't heard mentioned at all, especially at the very end of what's left of Bartlett. The last couple properties abut residential neighborhoods, of which I don't live in, but a lot of these distribution centers, almost all of them, are 24/7. By code, they have to have backup beepers. By code, those are heard about 2 to 3 kilometers if you hear a backup beeper, so people don't get hit. And if I had to live in that neighborhood and hear that at 2 or 3 in the morning, it'd be just horrible. But more important than anything, to me, it's so close to the high school, and we have so many kids going to Southboro. I don't want to see another cross with roses on it because someone gets hit by the added traffic. I think the safety thing here is paramount, and nobody's really addressed that. And more trucks and more traffic, 24/7. I know none of the kids drink, none of them do drugs, but if and when that happens, you know, I can't live with myself if we don't do something about it. I thought the moratorium made sense, but I got to sleep nights, and it's just wrong not to have something be more safe and have it so close to our high school.
And just one clarification, in case it was confusing. Our current definitions for warehouse and trucking is not changing, so it doesn't eliminate the ability for our, whatever's happening today will still happen with this change. It's just a matter of we've added definitions. We haven't taken away the definitions that are there. So just in case that was confusing to anybody.
Yes, right there.
Yeah, Mike Volcano, 57 Moore Lane. Could you please tell me roughly what type of tax revenue we're taking in off all those industrial buildings there on Bartlett Street? FedEx, how much money a year do we get in tax revenue?
That I don't have the answer to, but I can tell you my taxes have not gone down since they've been got.
Well,
put
somebody
in.
up here should have an answer.
Town Administrator,
It's
please.
a hell of a lot more than what I'm paying, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have the exact number, but Amazon, those 2 buildings down there are now the 3rd highest taxpayer in the community. It's, I don't have that number off the top of my head, I'm sorry. But it's over $1 million.
Over $1 million. So probably a lot more than that. You have Route 9 in Westboro, and then you have Lyman Street. I drive up Bartlett Street 3 days a week. 3 days a week, I'm up and down there. I go to my chiropractor over on Lyman Street in Westboro. Okay, I go back and forth all the time. You have 495, you have an exit on Route 20, which is a state road. Route 9 is a state road. There's no tractor trailer trucks driving, very few. Once in a while, if a guy's lost, going to go to Bartlett Street in Route 20 and try to make that turn to go up to 495. That's not happening. Not often. And most of the people, including people on the planning board, this is a little self-serving. This does not have, all of us, the best intentions for the town. We need to keep developing commercially, not put a moratorium on it, not to change all these bylaws. This does not help business come into town. This is on the taxpayer's back. The taxpayer's back. You start writing stuff like this, you're going to most businesses don't want to come here as it is because their building permits and stuff are always held up till the very last minute. This is not good. And what about all the lawsuits against the planning board? What's the cost of that to the town? Like, what is going on? This is real money. You're worried about traffic. I'm laughing here because I'll tell you why. Hudson Street's got traffic. Church Street's got traffic. We have 2 exits off of 290. If you have 2 exits off 290, you're going to have traffic. You have an exit off of 495, you're going to have traffic. You have a state road, Route 20, you're going to have traffic. I mean, what are we doing? You better think long and hard, folks, before you vote for stuff like this. Because tax dollars is what runs these towns. And if it's not coming from commercial, it's coming out of your pocket.
So just to respond to that, I would say that, as I pointed out, there's 2 sections of town that are industrial, so it's not just focused on one area of town. And I think it's important to think about the quality of life as well. And I personally haven't experienced a decrease in taxes, so if I have to think about all of the things that, like I talked about before with cost-benefit, there's a cost and there's a benefit. So just giving ourselves the opportunity to really look at both, I think is smart and helps us make better zoning decisions as a town. And that's really up to the voters here, whether we do that or not. We just wanted to bring it forward for us to have a conversation about it and decide if that's something we want to do.
We've had quite a few questions and discussions. I'm willing to let the people who are in line now go through, but that will be the end of our questions and discussions. Right over here, please.
Janique Callahan, Stirrup Lane, and I have to argue a little bit with the person that was just up here that said there's no tractor trailers on Bartlett Street going to...
Excuse me, ma'am, we're not here to argue.
I'm not arguing, sir.
Thank you.
I'm trying to make a point. The point is that there are tractor trailers driving past our high school. They're using Bartlett Street to get to 495, 290, Route 20. They are making the turn from Route 20 onto Bartlett Street. As Carrie mentioned, the quality of life. I live on Stirrup. I have 18-wheelers pulling down my street at least a few times a month, using my street as a turnaround. The quality of life for the people on Bartlett, Stirrup, Hemlock, Maple has all deteriorated because of Amazon, FedEx, and A. because we can't control them. The fact that I can't open up my windows on a Saturday morning or Monday morning, Tuesday morning, because I hear beeping, revving of trucks, engine brakes, air horns, that's not a quality of life. And all we're asking is that we take a pause. You guys are talking about tax revenue. Nobody's losing tax revenue from Amazon, FedEx, and A. They're here. They're not going anywhere. We're talking about maybe future tax revenue. And we're not taking tax revenue away. What we're trying to do is learn how to control the big warehouses and distribution centers that are coming in and destroying the quality of life, our roads that they're not paying taxes on to fix. So I hope that everybody takes into consideration the residents that have to put up with the warehouses and the distribution centers.
Right over here, please.
Yes, Rose DiBenedetto, 6 Laurel Avenue. And I'm going to springboard off of what you just said. I'm living in that area. It's 26 years now. And I have to be honest with you, I have not heard or felt the difference, and I'm right off of Hemlock. So the thing of maybe seeing one, it's like when you see one ant, you think you have the whole house is being eaten up alive. I think we really just have to look at it in aggregate. I am not woken up in the middle of the night. Yes, trucks, you can hear them on 495 if you live on Laurel or Hemlock, but that's 495. That's not always Bartlett. So I think we cannot, I know we say we want to take a pause, and I think that's wonderful. And I think in business, I think we'd all want to take a pause. But this is about looking at not today, it's looking at tomorrow. Next year, you're probably going to want to do, or we're going to want to do some expansions on our schools and our libraries and all of the other public services. That money does come from businesses. And all those routes and all of our industrial parks abut 495, 290, and 90. So for the one, or as you say maybe, or as some people will say, oh, I'm being bothered by 6, it's probably 6 truck drivers that they just hired because we're short with truck drivers. And as a nation, we're all suffering that. Businesses can pull out. And I know that we keep banging Amazon. However, they can pull out tomorrow. They did it in Queens. Never came to Queens, New York. They were planning on it, and within maybe 2 months decided, nope, we're not going to be going there. So for us to say, let's take a pause so we can catch up to them, they're light years ahead. So we need to plan for tomorrow, not for yesterday. Thank you.
Just to clarify, this bylaw is not the moratorium, and it literally does not change the existing definitions that are already in the bylaw. It's not a moratorium, it's not a pause, it is simply adding definitions to the bylaw.
Right over here, please.
Thanks. Mary Ellen Shaw. I live on 4 Sturbrick Lane. I am not a person who likes to come up and speak, to be honest with you, on issues. I cannot not speak. I live on a street. I came here many years ago. My daughter's in college. My son's in high school. I am a true blue Northboro. I love this town. I love everything it's provided for me and my family. And right now, I'm going to tell you what I really love. I love a lot of my neighbors who are speaking up and are making a difference and bringing up these issues to the planning board. This is affecting us. You know, you hear the sign and you hear everyone say, it doesn't really matter until it happens to you. It is happening to us. And we're going to tell you, everyone, it's not so great. I am with Janine. I hear all that as well. I one time drove home and I saw a truck in front of my neighbor's yard because they missed a turn and they got into Sturbrick Lane, causing traffic. I go and drive my son to school and there's trucks and trucks and trucks, and if I don't time it right, I might not be able to make that left. So this is real. This is not something that we're imagining and that we just want to cause some issues. No, this is affecting us. This is affecting our town. And this town is awesome. And I think we need to fight for it, and we need to keep it being awesome. And some of those things you do is by standing up and speaking when you don't want to speak so that changes can happen. So I want to thank everyone who has been driving this and bringing this in front of this crowd, and will keep driving it because we can make a difference, and it's time to be the difference. Thank you.
Right over here, please.
Kailash Viswanathan, 14 Buckle Road. So I think a lot of people are talking about, you know, this is not about losing businesses. It's not about losing a warehouse, losing Amazon, losing FedEx. It's just a pause, right? And I think we got to understand that irrespective of which business comes, when Amazon and FedEx were not there, I think Northboro survived, didn't we? So, you know, our taxes still go up. We'll pay taxes. I know that. So I have seen and I've read and I know about towns, may not be in Massachusetts, that survive with small businesses. They don't need an Amazon. They don't need a FedEx to survive, right? So let's think this, as the other lady just said, it's just a pause, right? And, you know, we're thinking about the future. We're thinking about the change. We're not thinking about our past. Thank you.
Right over here, please.
And I just want to say thank you for that comment. That was great. This is Robin Manning. I also live on Bartlett Street. And I will say 100%, you are wrong when you say 6 trucks go down Bartlett Street. My house shakes because of all the trucks. I can't count how many trucks go down Bartlett Street 24 hours a day. My kids, get woken up. I can hear them in my bedroom, which is on the back of my house. It's so disturbing that people can't even think. Taking a pause is going to help this town. There are 250 acres, I believe. Is that right, that are underdeveloped? That's industrial, that's still, could be warehouses like this? Is that right?
That I do not know.
Okay, so I do know that there are other industrial areas that are not developed. When this happens to you, you'll realize this not only brings down your property values, but also your quality of life. My taxes have not gone down. I don't know about anybody else's, but I have not reaped any benefits from these companies. All Kerry is saying, from what I can see, is they have to tell us what they want to use it for. What is it? So there's just a little bit more information that we gather to make an informed decision. Let's make informed decisions. This is about our town, our quaint little town. Are we, an industrial town now? Is this all we care about? Is a few dollars? Okay? Please, people, come on. Let's think. Just take a moment. Thank you.
Right over here, please.
Marker 10, 22 Hemlock Drive. 2 points I'd like to bring up. One is, yes, I can agree that we may want to divide up the industrial use of warehouses into finer categories, but in prohibiting their creation rather than just putting it before planning board review like the others, they are creating a moratorium. They are not simply refining the definitions. The other is that people should understand that FedEx and Amazon deliver in the little trucks that come to your house, and that any tractor trailer unpacks to about 20 to 30 to 1, so that every tractor trailer that you take off the road, you will be putting 30 more delivery vans to carry that stuff from a further destination in, say, Marlboro or Shrewsbury, instead of coming out of a nearby warehouse. So the real solution here is not to buy from Amazon or get stuff delivered by FedEx, but that's a tougher call. So that's it.
Right over here, please.
Brad Blanchett, 6 Rodney Terrace. Lifelong resident of Northboro, grew up on Davis Street, which was a main road. Now I live in a dead-end street. And honestly, I don't see 18-wheelers coming through my neighborhood. But the fact of the matter is, what the planning board is trying to do here is look at the greater good of the entire town. Not the people that live in cul-de-sacs, not the people who live on dead-end roads. And the people that have come up here tonight have said and been in favor or against these bylaws or the moratoriums live on dead-end roads, all right? The planning board is looking out for the greater good of this entire town, okay? We all love Amazon. We think it's great. We got paper towels in a day if we want it, okay? I mean, it is what it is. But the fact of the matter is, Northboro is a great town. I think it's the greatest town in America. And I moved back here, even though I vowed to never move back to the town I grew up in, but I'm here, and I wouldn't think twice about it. So I think we need to think about the big picture and not just think about what we call NIMBY, not in my backyard, but you need to think about all your neighbors. And you need to think about what they're going through. Bartlett Street is a main road now. It's not meant to be a main road, okay? It's okay to pause. We can take a time out. That's what I tell my kids. We take a time out, and we regroup, and then we figure out what to do moving forward. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir, right over here.
Yes, Manny Lopes, 96 Bartlett Street. First of all, I live on Bartlett. I don't take a 2-minute drive going through the street 3 times a week to assess traffic flow. I live there. So as you heard from the other residents, trust me, there's a lot of trucks going up and down that road 24/7. If you don't believe me, go check your next package from Amazon and see when it went by Bartlett Street to get to the Northboro facility. Typically 2, 3 in the morning, and then within an hour it's off to Milford. So we live there. We know the traffic. We live with it day in, day out. As someone says, you can't open your windows. Summer's going to be here. You hear trucks all day long. It's 90 to 100 decibel levels going down there. So the traffic problem there and the impact to our quality of life is real. If you don't, welcome to have you come by and stay in the area for a while and experience it yourself and see if you want to have it back in your neighborhood. 2, both of these articles are not saying Northboro isn't open for business. It's just saying we want to back off and take a time out and decide if we want to be more selective and more judicious in how we approve businesses going forward. We could be more like Marlboro and have industrial parks that have a higher employee count per square foot. And those employees will live in the local area versus transient truck drivers who don't spend the money here. They will live in our communities. They will go to shopping in our areas and support our local economy. Businesses like warehouses, yeah, They contributed tax dollars. But there's a lot more to attracting businesses than just warehouses. And this is, approving this is not saying we're closing Northboro to business. Most people here are not, I don't think, against business. It's just what kind of business do we want? And does it add to the character of the town or take away from it? Does it add to the quality or take away? I say additional trucks going up and down, which is what you get when you support these kinds of businesses, are not what I believe Northboro is supposed to be. At least it's not how I see the town and where I think it wants to go. Thank you.
Okay, for Article 40, this is what we're voting on. I move the town vote to amend Part 7 of the Northboro Town Code, the Northboro zoning bylaw, Section 7-05-020, classification of uses, industrial uses, and 5, distribution and transportation uses, and Section 7-05-030, table of uses, table of uses Part B, commercial and industrial districts, by deleting the text shown in strike-through and adding the text shown as underlined, as set forth in the warrant. All those in favor, please raise your cards. By the way, this is a 2/3 vote. And those opposed? I'm going to use the tellers. Okay, are the tellers ready? All those in favor, please raise your cards. Are the tellers ready?
Did you hear 24? 24, 15, 1, 5. 43, 43. And 42, 42. Thank you.
The tellers are complete. All those opposed, please raise your cards. Tellers are ready?
37, 37. 8. 12. 10. And 10, thank you.
Okay, the results of the voting. Those in favor, 124. Those opposed, 67. I declare that the article does not pass because it fails to meet the two-thirds vote. Article 41.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator. My name is Michelle Gillespie, resident of 117 Howard Street, member of the Northborough Planning Board. I move the town vote to amend Part 7 of the Northborough Town Code, the Northborough zoning bylaw, Section 07-020, by deleting the text shown in the strike-through and by adding the text shown as underlined as set forth in the warrant.
Second.
The motion has been made and seconded.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Article 41 of the zoning bylaw, Section 07, Section 707020 floodplain overlay district, is intended to update the purposes of the floodplain overlay district, designates the building inspector as the official floodplain administrator, requires permits for all proposed construction or other development within the district, sets forth requirements for issuances of variances, specifies use and construction standards, and defines applicable terms. I will read to you that maybe this is a little more helpful too. The article is necessary to ensure that Northborough's floodplain overlay district bylaw is consistent with the federal regulations and that those who own property within the floodplain can obtain national flood insurance coverage. The amendments update the purpose of the floodplain overlay district, designate the building inspector as the official floodplain administrator, require permits for all proposed construction or other development within the district, set forth requirements for the issuance of variances to the building code, floodplain standards, and zoning bylaws, specifies use and construction standards, and defines terms. The Planning Board voted unanimously in favor of this.
Thank you. May I hear from Muni Code and Bylaw, please?
Of course, Mr. Moderator. The Municipal Code and Bylaw Committee unanimously recommends this article. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions, any discussion about Article 41? Right over here first.
Yes, Mr. Moderator. Greg Rudy, 28 Moore Lane. I move to have the town vote to amend Article 41, zoning bylaw, Section 7-07-020, floodplain overlay district by inserting new subsections G and H to Section 1, heading A, the text of which exists in the current bylaw and which would have been redacted by Article 41 as shown underlined below. Heading A is general provisions. Section 1 is titled The Purposes of the Floodplain Overlay District R2. And the inserted line G is protect and preserve wildlife habitat, and H is preserve and maintain the groundwater table.
Can you bring that down?
Mr. Moderator, in my view, the proposed amendment would be within the scope of the article. I would just comment, though, that this amendment, like many being considered at town meetings across the Commonwealth this year and in the previous year, is basically derived from a model that's provided by the state. This language is not in that state model, but I do not see it as, again, something that's outside the scope of the article. It's not specifically a floodplain interest, but in my view, the meeting may vote upon it and decide if it wants to include the language.
We have before us a proposed amendment to Article 41. And is there any discussion, sir, that you would like to give based on the amendment?
Just that this language is an insertion based on the existing bylaw. It already exists as written. If it was good enough in the last bylaw, it should be good enough in this one. And protect and preserve wildlife habitat should not be a controversial issue, and it certainly pertains to floodplain ecology, science. I'm not a biologist, I'm not a geologist, I'm not a hydrologist, but even a casual research of floodplains indicates that it's a complex ecosystem, and those elements need to be considered. As I'm not going to dwell on the wildlife, people have their own opinions on that, but the water table issue, there's a non-insignificant portion of the town that lives outside of the water district. If you live outside the water district, you have a private well. If you have a private well, the water table and the water quality are immensely important to you and your pocketbook. There are floodplains outside the water district, all the way as far north as Solomon Pond. They exist. And it just seems common sense that this should not have been removed from the bylaw. I don't understand why it was. It would certainly make developers happy, but that's not my primary interest. Thank you.
Thank you. I will ask, both the planning board and municipal code and bylaw have not had an opportunity to review this, but I'll give them an opportunity to make a statement if they have an opinion on this.
Municipal code and bylaw did not receive a copy of this amendment. We are completely neutral about it. Thank you.
Likewise, Mr. Moderator, the planning board did not receive any of this information prior to making our decision and voting on this.
Mr. Campbell, I assume you're at the microphone for a question on the amendment?
No, sir, on the original article.
Okay, let's process this one first, okay? And see if we're going to get back to the original one. Are there any questions? Any discussion about the amendment to Article 41?
Carrie Martin, 16 Hemlock Drive. Is it possible for us, I'm on the planning board, to read what, it was hard to hear and process. Is there a way that we could just look at it and read it and just make sure? I want to give the resident the opportunity to.
Unfortunately, we have one copy. You can come down here and look at it if you'd like, but I don't want to pass this one copy we have around.
Okay. Oh, thank you. I have.
We have multiple copies.
David Brown, 11 Danforth. I've never been to a town meeting before, so I don't know how this works, but is there some way that the voters can actually see what we're voting on instead of just having it said real fast so that we actually have a clue? Is there some way to project it, some way to do something? Is it in, I said I've never done this before. That's what I'm trying to understand. Is it in the book? Okay, I looked in the book. I didn't see it.
What this is an amendment to the article that was in the book. The amendment came to the floor this evening.
And there's no process under which the voters have the ability to actually see what's written down before they vote?
I don't know if enough copies were prepared for that very reason or not. But typically...
Yeah.
Okay, but the modification...
Mr. Moderator, if I may, I apologize for not having additional copies, but this is the process that the town meetings have followed for years, and I'm just following that process. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask town council to guide us through this.
Mr. Moderator, on page 43 of the warrant, about a third of the way down the page at the heading General Provisions, that paragraph that is shown all in strike-through, that contains the two clauses that reflect the amendment, and so when the moderator reads that language, the body can then follow along. It appears, I believe, from the end of the first line to the beginning of the second line, and then from or at the end of the third line itself, relating to the groundwater table and wildlife habitat.
So is that clear to everyone? Page 43. If everyone goes to page 43, I will read the amendment, and then it should be apparent as to what we're talking about. Is everyone on page 43? Okay. The amendment says, I move to have the town amend Article 41, zoning bylaw, section 7-07-020, floodplain overlay district, by inserting new subsections G and H to section 1. Heading A, the text of which exists in current bylaw and which would be redacted by Article 41 as shown, underlined below. And the section underlined below says general provisions. Number 1, the purposes of the floodplain overlay district are to, and G is to protect and preserve wildlife habitat, and H is to preserve and maintain the groundwater table. Was that very clear? Good. We're all on the same page. Now I see that there are people with the microphones. This gentleman over here?
Yeah, well, because my question is, why was maybe it's been answered, I don't realize it's been answered, but for the general provisions, why did you cross that out? Why did you cross out the general provisions? That's just my question.
So the town engineer will come up and speak to that. As he said, that this is a bylaw that's been presented throughout the state. And Fred, if you want to answer his question with regards to that, he has the most knowledge about this bylaw.
Okay, all right.
Good evening, Fred Litchfield, town engineer. I crafted the bylaw in accordance with the guidelines that were given to us by the state floodplain coordinator. The bylaw as proposed has been reviewed and approved by the state floodplain coordinator. In order for the town's residents who need flood insurance to maintain the ability to get that, this needs to be passed. The sections of the bylaw that have been proposed as amendments were taken out as they're covered in other areas of our bylaw. Specifically, the Wetlands Protection Act and our local wetlands bylaw cover wildlife habitat protection. The groundwater overlay district that covers far more portions of the town than the floodplain overlay district covers groundwater quality issues. So the amendments that is before you originally covered everything that we needed to maintain compliance with the state floodplain coordinator and the federal government through FEMA. And so that's why it's proposed. I realize it's 9 pages where there was originally 3 pages, but that is because we were following the guidelines provided to us. I hope that answers your question.
So what you're saying is everything in that crossed out sentence is covered
Elsewhere in our local bylaws,
within
yes.
the bylaws we
Yes.
show, okay.
We have several other bylaws, overlay district, the groundwater overlay district, the local wetlands protection, the local wetlands bylaw, in addition to the Wetlands Protection Act, which is Mass General Law, Chapter 131, Section 40, as well as our land disturbance bylaw, stormwater bylaw that was adopted last year at annual town meeting.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Question over here.
Mr. Moderator, Ken Pickard, 78 Whitney Street. I have a procedural question regarding the planning board. If they are in a posted public session now, and if they aren't, They cannot vote on a recommendation for this proposed change. And we could check with town council on that.
Well, I think it was already we were made aware that the planning board said, seeing that they hadn't had a chance to review this, that they didn't have a recommendation.
But they cannot make a recommendation by counseling now unless they're in a posted meeting.
I don't think they were planning on doing that.
In light of that comment, I don't know if it's appropriate for me to speak. Is that okay for, not to give a recommendation on behalf of the planning board, but make a clarification?
I think you can talk about the process that you've gone through and how that applies to the amendment.
Okay, Carrie Martin, X 16 Hemlock Drive. In just reading this, as the Fred Litchfield commented, it's covered in another area, but also it would do no harm if residents felt strongly about including it. I would not want this motion to fail because of this, so if people do feel strongly about it, it does no harm if we need to include it.
John Foraker, 99 Pleasant Street. My question is for either Conservation or Mr. Litchfield, the Planning Board, or whatever. I don't know who the right person to ask this to, but we already have an aquifer overlay described as 1, 2, 3, and 4. Is that correct? 3? Okay, so we have three different aquifer overlays. Now, this bylaw that you want to, part of the bylaw you want to change, does that affect the 3 different overlays that are already there? And if it does, how does it affect it? Does it increase it? Does it decrease it?
It doesn't affect the groundwater overlay bylaw at all. This article only pertains to the floodplain overlay district. The floodplain that we have in effect here in Northboro was established at our annual town meeting in 2014. It's referenced in our zoning bylaw as being adopted July 16, 2014. That map is still referenced in this bylaw as well as in another part of our zoning bylaws. The groundwater overlay district is based on our town wells, existing and potential. And so the zone of influence for those wells are what's outlined in the various groundwater overlay districts 1, 2, and 3. The floodplain is to do with the elevation that the water could rise to in a 100-year storm in each of the rivers in our town.
Okay, now, with that said, we are on NWRA water now. We have no wells working. Does that affect what the overlay plan is? That should decrease it rather than keep it as it is, because our wells are no longer being used. And the reason for that was because the water was being drawn from a wide radius on each one of the wells. And I know for a fact that a little bit about what wells can do, because I worked for 7 years collecting gasoline out of the ground, and we did it with wells. So my question is how much of effect is that going to have on the 3 districts? And if it does, why wouldn't they be reduced instead of continuing the same way because of the well being not used?
That is an entirely different topic. This bylaw is regarding the floodplain overlay district and how people who have property in those districts need to apply to get permits or variance to do construction within those permits. It is totally unrelated to the groundwater overlay district. That is an entirely separate article that would need to be taken up at some point in the future. If the town decides to modify the groundwater overlay district, it would not be affected by the floodplain overlay district.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, just to remind you, what we're talking about is the amendment to Article 41. We've had discussion, we've had questions. I now suggest we prepare to vote on the amendment. This is what we're voting on. I move the town amend Article 41, zoning bylaws, Section 7-07-020, floodplain overlay district, by inserting new subsections G and H to Section 1. Heading A, the text of which exists in the current bylaw and which would be redacted by Article 41, as shown underlined below. And the underlined area includes, for Section 1, the purposes of the floodplain overlay district are to, and subsection G is protect and preserve wildlife habitat. And section H, subsection H is preserve and maintain the groundwater table. This is an amendment. This will be a simple majority. All those in favor of the amendment, please raise your cards. Those opposed? The amendment carries. Which brings us back to Article 41, the amended Article 41. We've had discussion. Ms. Gillespie, would you like to add anything? Or are you all set?
All set. Thank you.
Thank you. Here's what we're voting on, is the amended Article 41. I move the town vote to amend Part 7 of the Northborough Town Code, the Northborough zoning bylaw, Section 7-07-020, by deleting the text shown in strike-through and adding the text shown as underlined, as set forth in the warrant and reflected in the amendment. This is a two-thirds vote. All those in favor of the amended Article 41, please raise your cards. And those opposed? I declare that Article 41 amended has passed by the required two-thirds vote. Article 42, citizens petition. Mr. Doug Stone.
Good evening. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Tonight, we have the opportunity to decide whether we want to restrict our town meetings to weeknights or whether we like the Saturday morning format that was used with excellent attendance the last 2 years during the pandemic. In July 2020, there were 245 that attended, and last May 1st, there were 191. Let me provide a brief history. Town meeting was traditionally held beginning at 7:30 p.m. weeknights, with ending at 11 p.m., unless voted to extend in order to finish up. This led to sessions that ended at 12:15 a.m. in 2016 and 12:24 a.m. in 2018. 2016 was significant, with the last article deciding the fate of the White Cliffs by just 29 votes. By that time, 131 voters had left. At our 2019 town meeting, I presented an article to move the meeting start time to 7 p.m., which passed overwhelmingly. The following year, another article was passed moving the start time to 6 p.m. Due to the pandemic, neither starting time occurred, as meetings the past 2 years began on Saturday morning at 9 a.m. Both Westboro and Southboro town meetings were held last year on Saturday mornings. Southboro moved to a Saturday format in 2019, while Westboro traditionally has met on Saturdays. The motion before us is to return to the Saturday 9 a.m. format utilized these past 2 years. This motion does provide for additional sessions to meet on subsequent weeknights if necessary. Again, a brief history. Prior to 2015, town meeting usually required 2 sessions, with 3 sessions required in 2014. However, since 2016, town meeting has only required 1 session, with the exception of 2019, which required 2. So, if you do like evening meetings, with the passage of this article, it is likely you will still experience at least one session at some point, but only as a second or third session, such as tonight, being the second session. These additional sessions typically have ended earlier in the evening when most voters have been able to stay. Last night, according to our town clerk, 222 attended our meeting, yet the counted vote for the last article at 10:30 p.m. included just 119 voters. Nearly half had already left. So the question before us is whether it is in the town's best interest to meet during the early part of the day on Saturday, as was done the past 2 years, instead of always meeting well into a weeknight, leaving important business to literally be decided by nighthawks. So, Mr. Moderator, can I make the motion?
Yes, I was about to ask for that.
Okay. I move the town vote to amend the Northborough Town Code, Section 1-80-020, holding of annual town meeting, by changing the meeting date to the Saturday preceding the fourth Monday in April, with start at 9 a.m. and end at 1 p.m. Additional needed sessions to be held on subsequent weeknights, starting at 6 p.m. and ending at 10 p.m. Special town meetings to follow, same Saturday and weeknight format as needed.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Mr. Stone, do you have a motion that you signed?
Let's see. Okay, this is just the technical replacement of the language, which essentially says the same thing. I move the town vote to amend Section 1-80-020 of the town code as follows: delete paragraph A and replace with the following, which is pretty much what I just said. The annual town meeting shall begin on the Saturday preceding the fourth Monday in April at such place as the selectmen shall determine. The initial sessions of the meeting shall begin at 9 a.m. Upon completion of the article, which is under discussion at 1 p.m., the meeting shall be adjourned to the subsequent Monday at 6 p.m., provided that it is not a recognized state or federal holiday. And thereafter, the meeting shall continue on subsequent weeknights, starting at 6 p.m. and ending at 10 p.m. Insert the following sentence at the beginning of paragraph B: special town meetings shall follow the same format of starting on a Saturday and continuing on the subsequent weeknights as needed.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded.
Should I sign that then?
Mr. Stone, if you sign that, and we will put that in the archives.
Okay.
Any discussion or questions about Saturday town meetings?
Would you like to hear from the Municipal Code and Bylaw Committee?
Oh, you're prepared. Okay.
Of course. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The Municipal Code and Bylaw Committee applauds any and all efforts to increase turnout and participation at town meeting. In our review, we looked at some area towns in recent history, as well as anecdotal evidence from our own experiences in various towns, and did not see a dramatic change in or increase in participation for towns that have moved from weeknights to Saturday town meetings. Further, we knew that this would be the first time that we've had a 6 p.m. start, and we thought it was worthwhile to experience a 6 p.m. start for a little while to see how that fit for the town. So in the end, the Municipal Code and Bylaw, as I said, we applaud the initiative. We like the concept of increasing turnout, but we unanimously do not recommend this article. Thank you.
Thank you.
Interesting. Fran
Braxton.
76 Cedar Hill Road. I'm going to show up no matter when you have it, what day, what time of the week. It doesn't really matter. But I just have a question. I would hope that at 1 o'clock, just like we did last night, we can continue beyond if we decide we want to wrap up everything on that Saturday, right? I mean, that same process would apply. I'm seeing a nodding head from the moderator, so thank you.
Yes, there'll be, if the body decides and agrees that we can extend and go beyond the deadline, yes.
Mr. Moderator, Don Rand, 234A Church Street, Northboro. I would just like to point out that the date, the Saturday that is picked, is usually the last Saturday of school vacation week. So I wouldn't recommend this date. Most parents with little kids, or a lot of kids, do travel during the April vacation and are usually traveling Saturday to Saturday or using that Saturday as a travel day. So I don't think it would probably be a good day to get younger parents and families here.
Jeff Amberson, 260 Green Street. Kind of along with what Don was saying. Personally, I don't care when we have it. My personal feeling is that people who are going to attend town meeting are going to make the effort to get there no matter when it is. But my concern with Saturdays is that there are a lot of people who have kids who are in sports programs and other things going on Saturday. And my concern is a lot of those people wouldn't be able to attend or have to make a choice between supporting their kids, getting their kids to practice, whatever, or going to town meeting. So, but again, it's not a big deal to me. My kids are grown, but it may be to some.
Right over here, please.
Reverend Chad McCabe, 59 Howard Street. Good evening, everyone. As a representative of religious communities, I just want to make people aware that Saturday is the traditional Sabbath of our Jewish community members, as well as our Seventh-day Adventists. So proper consideration due for that as well, providing that they would have a conflicted feeling of attending their worship services or coming to the town meeting. It may be prohibitive for them in coming to participate. Thank you.
Yes, please.
David Brown, 11 Danforth. As I said earlier, this is the first time I've been here, and the reason I haven't been here is because it starts so late and I have children. The reality is a lot of people aren't able to come because they have children, and having it on Saturday would be more convenient for a number of people. The statement that a lot of people have sports on Saturdays, I wasn't going to be here today because I was supposed to coach baseball today. I had baseball practice yesterday, so I had to miss it. The reality is parents who have kids who do sports have it every single day. And if we can do something that will make people able to come, it's definitely in our best interest. And the statement that people are going to come, whether or not, somehow, if they're interested, just isn't true. This is the first time I've ever been able to make it. And it's only because my children are old enough that I can leave them at home today.
Mr. Moderator, can I respond?
Yes, you may.
Yeah, I realize people have conflicts, and there's never a good time for everybody. And as far as like the Saturday conflicts, I would just say, again, we did have excellent attendance the last 2 times. And it's just one Saturday a year. So if you are concerned about particular activities, it's just one Saturday that we're asking. But in conclusion here, I just wanted to say that I wanted to bring people a choice. And that's what I did when we changed the starting time. And after I made that change that people voted on, I thought, after all these years, I could have made a proposal to start earlier, and how many people would have appreciated having that choice. And so that's what I wanted to do tonight, was bring people a choice. And, I mean, I'll still go no matter what time it is in most cases. But, again, I just wanted to feel like this is a public service to give people a choice.
Over here, please.
John Campbell, 29 Spruce Hill Drive. Doug, I wanted to add my commending of you. I'm in favor of anything to make town meeting more efficient. It doesn't seem, though, that we're really getting at the root of it. The key to me has always been how to get more people involved. What would motivate more people to attend a town meeting of all age groups? And I don't have the answer. I just think for some, it's too long. For some, it's inefficient, perhaps boring to some. Not to the people presenting, obviously. But maybe there's a way to look at other aspects of town meeting, how to make it quicker. Maybe we limit the number of articles in a given year. That's not always the case. But if there were ways to encourage more people to come, I'd be in favor of working toward that goal. I don't think the time frame necessarily is going to change it that much. And I'd be concerned about the overflow from Saturday, then having to restart on a Monday. That would be probably the most inefficient thing. So getting more people to town meeting is the goal. I commend you for trying. I'm open to other ideas too.
And our last comments?
Brad Blanchett, 6 Rodney Terrace. So I have young kids, and I think asking parents or residents with kids in town for 2 nights you're asking a lot. And I have been at these town meetings where we've gone past midnight. And so the Saturday meetings, I think are okay because you can start early. And February, March, I'm not a skier, but sometimes February, March isn't really good skiing season. It's not baseball and lacrosse season. So you're asking people just to commit one day, and you can kind of get through everything. And especially now because, you know, the first night, let's be honest, it's like approving budgets and things like that, not the real fun stuff. The second night is usually where we really get into it, right? I mean, Mr. George, you had to get the counters out a handful of times tonight.
And I'll hear about it when I get home.
So try to get it all in one day, February, March, even April. It's not great weather. I'm in favor of this. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, this is what we're voting on for Article 42. I move the town vote to amend Section 1-80-020 of the Town Code as follows. Delete paragraph A and replace with the following. The annual town meeting shall begin on the Saturday preceding the 4th Monday in April, as such place as the selectmen shall determine. The initial sessions of the meeting shall begin at 9 a.m. Upon completion of the article which is under discussion at 1 p.m., the meeting shall be adjourned to the subsequent Monday at 6 p.m., provided that it is not a recognized state or federal holiday. And thereafter, the meeting shall continue on subsequent weeknights starting at 6 p.m. and ending at 10 p.m. And the following will be inserted. Insert the following sentence at the beginning of paragraph B. Special town meetings shall follow the same format of starting on a Saturday and continuing on the subsequent weeknights as needed. This is a majority vote.
Mr. Moderator, may
Yes.
I make one comment? Mr. Moderator, there was a question during the debate regarding the ability to suspend by a 2/3 vote and go beyond 1 o'clock on Saturday. The motion that I prepared for the petitioner did not include that because I wasn't sure if he intended that. But if he does, and if the meeting would want to retain that language, then I'd recommend that we include it. And if the petitioner says so, I'll provide the moderator with the place in the motion where that language should go so that we don't have any confusion on that point.
Yes, I didn't want to change the format. If we want to extend it by vote, that's fine.
This is where the Jeopardy music comes in.
So we would be adding to the first part of the proposed amendment, which specified that the meeting starts at 9 a.m. on the Saturday and then is continued to the following Monday, the following sentence. And this is the language that currently appears in the bylaw. A two-thirds vote of those present may extend that meeting beyond the normal time of adjournment.
Just to make sure we are official, I will very quickly read this one more time so that we know what we're voting on. I move the town vote to amend Section 1-80-020 of the Town Code as follows. Delete paragraph A and replace with the following. The annual town meeting shall begin on the Saturday preceding the fourth Monday in April in such place as the selectmen shall determine. The initial session of the meeting shall begin at 9 a.m. Upon completion of the article, which is under discussion at 1 p.m., the meeting shall be adjourned to the subsequent Monday at 6 p.m., provided that it is not a recognized state or federal holiday. And thereafter, the meeting shall continue on subsequent weeknights, starting at 6 p.m. and ending at 10 p.m. A two-thirds vote of those present may extend that meeting beyond the normal time of adjournment. Also, to insert the following sentence at the beginning of paragraph B. Special town meeting shall follow the same format of starting on a Saturday and continuing on the subsequent weeknights as needed. As I said before, this is a majority vote. All those in favor of Article 42, please raise your cards. And those opposed? It's close. It's close. Tellers, it's close enough.
It's just a majority vote, right?
That is correct.
It is, because it might be some vacation week. You know, that's the part that I'm dicey about. Otherwise, I'm happy to do Saturday. It's easy one. Not great this evening. I don't know. I don't think so.
Okay, tellers are in place.
I know, right? No one wants
All those in favor, please raise your cards.
Twelve, 1, 2. Thank you. 9.
26. 17, thank you.
Okay, your cards down. All those opposed, please raise your cards.
He said you can put your hands in.
$38. 8. 16.
19.
And 19.
Okay, the vote, yes, in favor, was 64. No was 81. The article does not pass.
Mr. Moderator,
Yes?
I'd like to make a motion that we reconsider Article 39.
Okay. You got it in just under the wire. And is this because there's new information?
Yes, new information.
Okay. And what new information is there?
The new information is that in all the years that I've attended town meeting, I've never heard so many people discuss why they felt that the previous article, should still be considered. So it's my opinion that we've heard a lot of new information and that people should reconsider their vote.
Is there a second?
Mr. Moderator, point of order.
Yes.
I may not know the exact statute, but if I recall right, the petitioner who asked for reconsideration has to have voted against the petition. You can't have voted in favor of it to be able to reconsider it.
I will get the opinion of town council on that.
Thank you.
So you're saying that I voted against it?
Mr. Moderator? The petitioner asked me to ask a question. Can I answer him?
Actually, from the standpoint of my conversation with council, I don't think it makes a difference. Okay? It's not a statute, by the way. Okay? And it's in the manual, and it's impossible for us to identify how an individual voted on a particular. We can ask him. But this.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessary to answer.
So, Mr. Stone has made a motion, it was seconded, to reconsider the Article 39, the zoning bylaw, for a temporary moratorium. Mr. Stone indicated that there was new information that he wanted to add, and that new information, and I'm paraphrasing, is that you've heard the conversation and discussion that took place this evening that gave more information than we had when that decision was made. Is that correct?
Yes.
Any discussion on the motion to reconsider? Mr. Stone, please share.
The information is that, in my opinion, in all the years I've attended town meeting, I've never heard so many people voice their feelings about why the amendment should still be passed. We're on Article 40, which is, as the planning board indicated, is just a matter of changing some definitions and the zoning. And yet, people are standing up talking about why we should pause. And the planning board again indicated, this is not an article about pausing. And yet people still continue to talk about pausing. So that, I think, is significant.
Mr. Moderator?
Yes.
My point of order is, I don't feel this is new information. This information was discussed on 2 articles, it was voted on in 2 articles, and it did not pass on the other article. This is not new information. This is just an ability to bring a count when there's less people here.
Over here.
Jeff Amberson, 260 Green Street. There's no new information. It's just people complaining about the previous vote. You know, tell us give us concrete new information that wasn't available prior, other than people are unhappy with the previous vote.
Well, the new information is that, my opinion, that we need some more studies. I've lived in this town all my life, and I want to see the best return on revenue that we can. And I don't think that that should be debated.
Mr. Moderator, that's not new information. That's just an opinion that he doesn't like the vote. New information is concrete facts that weren't available during the initial discussion.
Right over here, please.
Kelly Gannett, 69 Northgate Road. I agree with the gentleman. I think I've been to these for years now, and I think that there was a highly debated after the fact that it didn't pass. And I also agree that the numbers are down now, and that just goes to the point of previous warrant article that he was just suggesting, how the numbers dwindle as the night goes on, as the days go on. And I'd like to see this voted on.
I have 2 more comments, and then we will vote.
Hi, I'm Rachel Armstrong, 10 Hemlock Drive. I have some information that wasn't brought up previously. We had a traffic study done a few months ago that indicated on Bartlett Street 12% of traffic was truck traffic. That's actually double what we would have needed for a truck exclusion, but we can't get it because we would need the permission of Marlboro. So that's actual data saying that it's not just 6 trucks a day on Bartlett Street. We have the numbers. We can't do it because it requires the permission of another town. What I want people to know is that the industrial parcels that are up, that could potentially have new warehouses are not on Bartlett Street. So all of those issues could be impacting your neighborhood. But there is data supporting that we do need a truck exclusion, that there is heavy truck traffic on Bartlett Street. It's not just anecdotal. So thank you.
Okay, we've had our discussion. We're talking about the reconsideration for Article 39. As I mentioned earlier, for reconsideration, it's counterintuitive. If you say you do want reconsideration, that opens the debate up further, and we discuss it, and we can, talk about different things then. If you vote no, that means there is no reconsideration, and the books are closed on that particular article. All those in favor of reconsideration, please raise your hands, or your cards. And those opposed? Tellers, come help me.
What? I know.
All those in favor of reconsideration, please raise your cards.
Eight. 10. 33. And 18, thank you.
Okay, everyone put their cards down. And those opposed to reconsideration?
Forty-one. 8. 12.
22.
22. 2-2. Thank you.
Okay, the vote was yes to reconsideration, 69. No to reconsideration, 83. Reconsideration does not pass. Let's end on a good note, folks. Let's end on a good note. Okay, article, as I have to flip back. Article 43, citizens petition. Adam Costello.
Go. I can write something while you're speaking.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me okay? I will read the article as it's written in the book. My counterpart will conduct a presentation, and then definitely happy to answer any questions or clarify any confusion. For the article, to see if the town will vote to accept the provisions of Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 59, subsection 5,
Clause 22nd H inserted by Chapter 218 of the Acts of 2018, known as an act relative to veterans' benefits, rights, appreciation, validation, and enforcement, otherwise known as the BRAVE Act, signed into law August 28th, 2018, which provides for a property tax exemption for real estate as follows. To the full amount of the taxable valuation of the property of surviving parents or guardians of soldiers and sailors, members of the National Guards, and veterans who, during active duty service, suffered an injury or illness documented by the United States Department of Veterans Affairs or a branch of the armed forces that was approximate result cause of their death. Missing in action with presumptive finding of death as a result of active duty service as members of the armed forces of the United States, provided, however, that real estate shall be occupied by the surviving parents or guardians as a surviving parents or guardians domicile, and provided further that the surviving parents or guardians shall have been domiciled in the Commonwealth for 5 consecutive years immediately following or immediately before the date filing for an exemption pursuant to this clause, or the soldier or sailor, member of the National Guard or veteran, was domiciled in the Commonwealth for not less than 6 months before entering service. Surviving parents or guardians eligible for an exemption pursuant to this clause shall be eligible regardless of when the soldier, sailor, member of the National Guard, or veteran died or became missing in action with a presumptive finding of death, provided, however, that the exemption shall only apply to tax years beginning on or after January 1st, 2019. Such exemption shall be available until such time as the surviving parents or guardians are deceased. No real estate shall be so exempt which has been conveyed to the surviving parents or guardian to evade taxation.
Second.
There'll be a presentation, and again, if there are questions, more than happy to address. Thank you.
Do I have a copy of the motion? Is there a... Okay, beforehand, right?
Mr. Moderator, thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. Good evening, everyone. I'm Don Veach from 31 Pine Haven Drive. I've been a Northboro resident for 22 years. I recently retired from the Army as a Command Sergeant Major with 29 years of service and 2 deployments to the Middle East. Caring for our veterans and their families began in earnest a little over 150 years ago. With the Civil War nearing an end, President Lincoln spoke to the nation during his second inaugural address. At the conclusion of this speech, he said, "To care for him who have shall borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan." President Lincoln's words affirmed the country's obligation to care for those injured during the war and to provide for the families of those who perished on the battlefield. With the passing of the BRAVE Act, a comprehensive bill signed into law in 2018, Massachusetts addressed further needs of the Commonwealth's veterans and their families. I'm here tonight to speak to you about the BRAVE Act, and specifically the portion of the law which must be adopted on a community-by-community basis. This clause provides for a property tax exemption for parents or guardians of service members who were killed or died as a result of active service since September 11th, 2001. Surviving parents or guardians must be residents of Massachusetts for 5 consecutive years, and service members have had to have lived in their parents' or guardians' legal home for 6 months prior to enlistment. From 9/11 to now, 7,075 U.S. service members have paid the ultimate sacrifice. 159 of them came from 110 communities in Massachusetts. One of those service members was from Northboro. In 2014, when Brian Arsenault was killed in the line of duty, I stood outside St. Rosa Lima for nearly an hour to pay my respects, as did a great many of our residents. Several businesses in town temporarily closed to allow employees to attend the services. The outpouring of support from Northboro was impressive and heartwarming. Certainly enough to make me proud to have chosen such a town to live in. 7 years later, the BRAVE Act came up for a vote in last year's town meeting, and it failed to pass. I was deployed at the time and unable to attend the proceedings, but when I was made aware of the renewed effort and the citizens' petition, which brings this exemption forward, I felt compelled to speak. Before I address some of the questions from last year, I want to take a brief detour to go over who veterans are. As you can see from this chart, the veteran community comes from every demographic throughout the Commonwealth and the country, which, with such a diverse group, it is impossible to accurately speak on behalf of all veterans or for one statement to encompass their opinions, desires, or beliefs. The next few slides will contain last year's statements from other residents and some clarification on the questions they raised. Okay, the last thing a veteran would want to do is burden the town. This could impact our taxes. What is the estimated burden on our taxes? How much is the town going to lose? And how many in the town would benefit from this exemption? As I just mentioned, veterans are a diverse group. I don't believe someone can make a comment that universally applies to all of us. This will impact your property taxes, but less than $3 per year per household. One family in Northboro is eligible to benefit from this exemption. Those who died would be ashamed of causing a hardship for their town. I won't speak for anyone. I'll only speak for myself. But I certainly wouldn't be ashamed to know my family was taken care of had I not returned. Going to war is no easy thing, but this would have been one less thing for me to worry about. All I can say is the average bill, $8,000 a year, unsure how many people would benefit from this. As I mentioned, there is one family from Northboro. Can people move to the town and get this benefit? Not retroactively, only for tax years going forward? Do we know how many other towns have adopted this amendment? Yes, eligible people can move to the town. They must already qualify with residency requirements, with more than 80 other communities to choose from, including Westboro, Grafton, and Shrewsbury. Many who already receive this benefit are not likely to relocate solely for this reason. And the benefit is not retroactive. Gold Star spouse should receive this benefit. I totally agree, and there's already a Mass General law that takes care of this. Parents do not have a compelling need compared to the spouse, children of deceased. Well, the Massachusetts legislature and the governor included this in the law because there was a need. I would like to point out that as we grow older, we often rely more heavily on our children for care and financial support. What do we do if that's not possible anymore? This exemption does provide a path for keeping home ownership for residents to stay in the community they have belonged to for years. My observations have me believe this town is made of a great many residents with large hearts. On the Northboro Community Group Facebook page, there are numerous posts in support of providing aid for an Afghan refugee family, as well as rallies in support of the Black Lives Matter movement and the people of Ukraine. It is admirable to think of others across the globe, but let's not forget the ones in our own town. So why should we pass this exemption? Passing this exemption reinforces Northboro's commitment to be an inclusive community and demonstrates our appreciation for the sacrifice of our fallen service members. A great deal has been asked of our all-volunteer force over the last 20 years of war. For 7,075 families, too much has been given. This is an opportunity to recognize this sacrifice. This could mean the difference between a fallen service member's family staying in town or being forced to sell their home. And lastly, the cost is minimal. At less than $3, it's not the burden several discussed last year. I'd like to leave you with two questions. Do we want to compound the suffering of a fallen service member's family? And what does it say about our community if we don't pass this exemption and the towns around us have? Thank you all for your time and attention and your support.
May I hear from Muni Code and Bylaw, please?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mitch Cohen for the final time this evening from the Municipal Code and Bylaw Committee. We emphatically and unanimously recommend approval of this article. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, any discussion on Article 43? Yes.
Thank you, moderator. Thank you, everyone here tonight. It's been a long night. It's been a long 2 days. I'm not originally from around here. I'm from a place called Mount Airy, Maryland, a small town similar to this. I know many of you through my son's scouting, through some of you I see are parishioners at my parish. And one of the things that people know about me is that I am the pastor of a local congregation, but I'm also a chaplain. I'm a chaplain in the U.S. Army National Guard. I am a veteran of over 15 years. I served a combat deployment to Kirkuk, Iraq in 2016 under the 101st Airborne Division. And I am also tasked with being the one that comes to these families' homes. And last year I missed this town meeting. We don't have these where I'm from, and I'm sorry I did because of this. And I'm very appreciative of some of the concerns that people in our community have raised about the impact. But when I came here 6 years ago, it was in August of 2016, and one of the first things that my leadership at the church brought up was about Applefest. And I remember coming into town, and I saw these banners lining Main Street, celebrating those who served in our community. And I'm thankful for them. But what do we do when the rubber hits the road? When we are asked to do more than put signs out or to wave flags? Will this have a big impact on us? The Sergeant Major has shown that it'd be very minimal. But is it the same type of impact that Brian's family felt? Because you see, when we come to the door as chaplains, you watch a family collapse. Because these were our daughters and sons who were in our scouts, who served at Tommy Lowe's. These were the kids that graduated from this school. Well, all they wanted to do was what we asked them to aspire to care about others before themselves. I came back in 2016. Many have not. I ask you to please pass this, to show that we are truly a community dedicated to those who watch their sons and daughters go off to protect the aspirations that we project on them, never to return. Thank you all again for this opportunity.
Yes, hi, Manny Lopes, 96 Bartlett Street. First of all, I have to say, this is a really noble cause. I'm a veteran as well, so I think this is great. I have a question, though. I really want to know, what are we voting on? Because I read the BRAVE Act, and it talks about 5 years domicile in Northboro residents, right? But when I read the article in the flyer, it sounds like it's open to all of Commonwealth. It says 5 years in the Commonwealth. Can you tell me, are we voting on taking care of residents of Northboro? Because I agree, one Gosar family, $3. I don't think there's anyone here who says, geez, that's a good cause. I'm all for it. But is this from Massachusetts or is this for Northboro residents? Because the two
Please
things
use
are
the
different.
microphone.
I'm sorry, the two documents are different. The flyer out front says Northboro, this says Commonwealth.
Well, you definitely want to use the language from the article, and the article says 5 years domicile in the Commonwealth. Right, so we are talking about the Commonwealth. Each town is voting on this separately. There's The Sergeant Major said that a number have passed in our area, a number have passed throughout the state. And so we're voting to say, do we want to do that here or not?
Okay. It's just misleading because when you have two different documents, right, and the data you're using of $3 is a nothing, right? I mean, we'd all say that's a great thing. It's just we need to clarify the facts of what we're voting on is all I wanted to do. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You're right, the documents are different. We clarified after those were printed that it was actually Massachusetts, and that's why I made sure that that was in my presentation, so that we could clarify that.
Okay, thank you. Yep.
Over here, please.
Lois Vandecouple Smith, 97 Main Street. So my question relates to that same thing. So if somebody was in a Gold Star family and they were living in Springfield for 5 years and their service person was living with them for 6 months prior, and then they moved to Northboro, are we committing to paying their taxes?
Yep, so if somebody comes in, as long as they were a resident of the Commonwealth for 5 years, and if they move to Northboro,
Okay.
then we would, or they can apply for the exemption and receive the exemption.
Okay. Yeah, so I agree with him that the flyer was pretty misleading, that it made it sound like it was only the people that have been living in Northboro, but it,
I promise you, I'm here to answer your questions truthfully.
Yep,
And I will not mislead you.
okay, thanks.
Right over here, please.
David Cooley, 280 West Street. I'm 33 years old. I've lived in this town my entire life. In 2007, I was one out of my graduating class that joined the United States military from this high school. In 2008, I went to Fort Benning, Georgia for infantry school. In 2010, I deployed to Afghanistan. The first week I was in Afghanistan, we sent 36 soldiers home. It's an embarrassment to this community that last year this was voted down. Let me tell you something. It's an embarrassment to this community that last year the questions that were brought up were brought up. I went to this high school with Brian Arsenault. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Scott Rogers, 26 Tomahawk Drive. Just a clarifying question. As written, it was for tax years starting in 2019. Would the exemption extend backwards to the family to 2019?
No, there's no retroactive benefit.
Thank you.
Jeff Amberson, 260 Green Street. As most of you know, I spent 18 years on the Board of Selectmen here. And I can tell you, and I apologize, that the toughest time that we had, the most emotional time during those 18 years, was when we lost Brian. But it was also the proudest time, because I watched this community come together. In the most difficult of times, this community rallied around not only the Arsenals, but they rallied together for a common cause to support these people. I'm just hoping that we can think back on that time, and while we can never repay their sacrifice, this is a time that we can once again, together as a community, support a family which is given much more than we can ever repay. So I would urge you to support it.
Last comments, please.
Last comment. Sarah Yulia Sabo, 16 Whitney Street. It's my first time standing up in a town meeting. I applaud this coming up. I heard it last year. My question, and perhaps an encouragement to everyone, is it's my understanding that this only covers property owners. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah.
Okay. Is there something that could be done in future town meetings to extend this to renters or others? I realize that I am privileged to be a property owner. Many of us here are privileged to actually own a home. with the cost of housing going up, we would want to have extending the same benefits to those who perhaps can't afford to own property in this town but are renting, and their families are giving the same sacrifice. I think we need to include them as well.
Ma'am, do you have some new information or a new comment, please?
I always do.
Okay.
Joan Frank, 420 Whitney Street, and a proud resident here for the past 44 years. I would like to say that I am in support of this bill for many reasons, but the most important reason is that Brian Arsenal was a wonderful student here at Algonquin. He lived up to all the ideals. He had love for his students and his teachers. He was a sports star, and in sports, we instill all the kids to work together for a common goal. I've heard so many things here tonight about the wonderful town that we have, and that we have a lot of great areas, great citizens. We work together. We can disagree, but we come together at the end. I am wholeheartedly supportive of this because the spirit of Brian is in this school, and that's what we do. And thank all the taxpayers for everything that you've done for every student that comes through here. I'm the proud daughter of a father who was a veteran who was in the third wave in Normandy. He came back safely. I am very lucky that I can stand here today. And in that way, through my father and what he did and all servicemen and all of you tonight, we do need to pass this and give the honor to the honor soul family that has lived in this town. Thank you, voters.
Okay, this is what we're voting on for Article 43. I move the town vote to accept Section 59, Clause 22nd H of Chapter 59 of the Massachusetts General Laws. This is a majority vote. Tellers, you can relax. All those in favor, please raise your cards. And those opposed? Article 43 passes. If there are no special reports, I would entertain a motion to dissolve.
So moved.
To dissolve.
Second.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good evening.